Hello, and welcome to Whispers of Earth, a quiet space where curiosity is allowed to linger. Where time can slow enough for the planet to tell its stories. Tonight, we are not staying in the present. We are stepping far, far back, into a world that no longer resembles the one beneath our feet. Imagine peeling back the layers of history until even the continents lose their familiar shapes. Before there were nations or cities, before the oceans as we know them carved their boundaries. Before the map of the world resembled the one that lives in your mind. There was a single, boundless continent. A vast land that gathered nearly all the world's earth into one colossal sweep. Its name was Pangea. You may have heard that name once, tucked between textbook diagrams or whispered in an old documentary. But few ever stopped to imagine what that world truly looked like. What did it feel like to stand there? To breathe its air. To walk across a landscape that had no oceans to separate it. No borders to divide one horizon from another. To understand that world, we have to let go of the map inside our heads. The Atlantic Ocean did not yet exist. Neither did the Pacific, nor the Indian, nor the Arctic. There were no coastlines shaped like puzzle pieces, waiting to be fitted back together. Instead, there was one endless body of land. A single world surrounded by a single ocean. Its surface unbroken and immense. Its edges touching the same eternal sea. If you could have walked across that world, you might have begun in what we now call North America and never once seen water. You could have traveled east for months, crossing into the lands that would one day become Europe and Asia, without ever boarding a ship. If you turned south, you could have passed into the future lands of Africa and South America, without ever seeing a coastline. There was only land, rolling, stretching, and changing color beneath the same sky. Bordered by a single ocean that wrapped around everything like a ring. But this world was not quiet. It was not still. The earth has never been still. Even then, beneath that endless surface, forces beyond imagination were at work, slow, powerful, invisible. They were pushing, twisting, and reshaping the ground. As if the planet itself were breathing in its sleep. Those forces welded continents together. Folded mountains from the crust. And tore open valleys that glowed with rivers of fire. Volcanoes rose across the land, painting the sky in ash and flame. Earthquakes shuddered through the crust. Their echoes swallowed by an atmosphere thick with dust and heat. And yet, life, fragile and persistent, had already found a foothold. Even in this harsh, unpredictable world. Plants stretched toward the light. Insects buzzed through humid air. And strange reptilian creatures crept across the soil. Testing the edges of what life could endure. Far from the sea, the air was different. There was no ocean breeze to carry moisture inland. Rain rarely fell. The great heart of Pangea was an oven by day and a frozen desert by night. The climate was cruel, the horizon endless. And still, life filled every corner it could reach. In some places, ancient forests rose in tangled silence. Their towering trunks shedding spores into the heavy air. In others, red deserts rolled toward the horizon. Their sands shifting under winds that carried dust for hundreds of kilometers. The earth was alive, but it was a different kind of life. A world guided by unfamiliar rules. A world that had not yet learned the geography we know. Perhaps the strangest thing about it all was the absence of division. Today, we are used to a planet cut into pieces by oceans and seas. But in the age of Pangea, there were no barriers. A river could begin in what we now call Asia and wind its way through the lands of future Europe. Without ever meeting the sea. Forests stretched uninterrupted from one side of the supercontinent to the other, their roots weaving through soils that connected half the world. Animals could wander freely, migrating from the future lands of South America into Africa or India without crossing water. Species mixed and mingled. Life spread as if the entire Earth were one vast, open stage. It was a world without isolation. A single, breathing organism of land, wind, and stone. But this unity was never meant to last. The same forces that pulled the continents together were already preparing to tear them apart again. That is the way of this planet. It builds, it breaks, it remakes itself. Oceans open and close. Mountains rise, and then crumble into dust. Continents drift like slow-moving clouds across geological time. While Pangea endured, though, it left scars that remain visible today. Marks etched deep into the bones of the earth. Mountains still bear the seams of its collisions. Rocks still carry the fingerprints of its ancient climates. Fossils tell the story of species that once roamed freely across lands, now divided by entire oceans. Before we can reach the moment when Pangea began to fragment, we must first step even further back, to the era before it was born. Because Pangea did not simply appear. It was forged, piece by piece, from the wreckage of older worlds. Beneath our feet, the Earth's crust is not a single, solid shell. It is a mosaic, broken into immense slabs called tectonic plates. These plates drift on the molten material of the mantle, moving only a few centimeters each year. But given enough time, those small movements reshape everything. Long before Pangea, other supercontinents had existed. Ancient, forgotten giants with names like Rodinia and Nuna. Each one rose and fell over hundreds of millions of years, their fragments drifting apart only to collide again in new forms. It was part of the planet's natural rhythm, a breathing pattern written into the stone itself. As the eons passed, smaller continents and volcanic islands slowly collided and merged. Each impact folded mountains skyward and sealed new seams into the crust. The Earth gathered itself like a puzzle coming together piece by piece. And when the last fragments fused, it created a world that defies imagination. A single, continuous landmass surrounded by one endless ocean. To stand at the center of that land would have been to stand in the most isolated place in history. No coastlines. No smell of salt. No sound of waves. Only wind. The endless rush of air that crossed thousands of kilometers of open land. The interior of Pangea was a continent within a continent. A place so far from water that clouds rarely reached it. Summers burned. Winters froze. The ground cracked beneath the sun and hardened under frost. But this very isolation shaped the creatures that lived there. Insects grew large, fueled by an atmosphere rich in oxygen. Reptiles adapted to endure heat and drought. Forests took root along river valleys that wound through the dry plains, forming narrow corridors where life could cling to moisture. From these beginnings would come the ancestors of dinosaurs, mammals, and birds. Volcanoes erupted across the horizon, filling the air with ash that drifted for weeks before settling into fertile soil. Rivers carved deep channels through the mountains, carrying minerals from the heights into the lowlands. Deserts expanded and retreated with the rhythm of the seasons. Everywhere, the signs of a living, shifting world were written in dust and stone. Even the air itself was different. Today, oceans break and redirect the winds. But on ancient Pangea, nothing stood in their way. Winds could travel across half the planet without interruption, carrying dust from inland deserts to the farthest coasts. Storms traveled farther. Weather systems spanned unimaginable distances. The entire climate of Earth revolved around that single, united landmass. Every sunrise revealed the same truth. This was one world, whole, immense, and unbroken beneath the same sky. But before Pangea's birth, the Earth had been something else entirely. A patchwork of smaller continents scattered across a vast primordial ocean. They drifted slowly, colliding, separating, and colliding again. Their dance across the surface of the planet would last hundreds of millions of years. Until at last, they gathered into one. To understand how this happened, we must imagine the Earth as it was roughly 300 million years ago. In the late Paleozoic era, several great landmasses were already adrift, moving like islands across the planet's surface. Laurentia, what would become North America, and Gondwana, which held the future lands of South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India, were on a slow collision course. Other pieces, Siberia, Baltica, and smaller island arcs, floated between them. When they finally met, oceans vanished, mountains rose, and the Earth entered one of the most dramatic transformations in its history. The ocean that once separated them, an ancient body called the Reich Sea, was swallowed as land crashed into land. The collision was violent, folding rock like paper, raising mountain ranges that would one day weather into the hills we know. The Appalachian Mountains in North America, and parts of the Atlas Range in Africa, still bear the scars of those ancient impacts. From above, the planet would have looked strange and raw. Massive continents crawling toward one another, surrounded by a global ocean named Panthalassa. A sea so vast that no modern ocean compares. As the continents converged, volcanic islands were swallowed. Shallow seas disappeared. And the Earth's face was rewritten. But even as the crust moved, the climate shifted. Massive ice sheets still clung to the southern poles of Gondwana. Glaciers scored the rock, scratching their slow stories into the Earth's skin. And as the continents merged, ocean currents changed course, altering wind patterns and seasons across the planet. Every mountain that rose redirected the weather. Every valley that opened changed the path of rivers. The creation of Pangea was not just the shaping of land. It was the birth of a new climate system. And as the world fused together, the stage was set for life to evolve in ways the planet had never seen before. The story of Pangea is not the tale of a single event. It is the story of slow inevitability, a planet rearranging itself over unimaginable time. Continents moved as though pulled by invisible threads, drawn together by the deep forces beneath the crust. And when at last they met, the Earth became something new. A world with one body, one heartbeat, one unbroken skin of land. The collisions that formed Pangea were not gentle. When plates meet, the planet groans. Rocks fold and fracture. Mountains are thrust skyward. The crust, like an ancient scroll, is crumpled and rewritten. These moments of creation come with violence. Eruptions of fire, seas boiled away, earthquakes that can last for centuries in geological memory. Where the continents fused, mountain ranges rose to rival the Himalayas of today. Their peaks glistened with ice even under a hotter sun. Their bases cloaked in forests that drank from rivers born in snowmelt. Between them stretched broad basins. Valleys filled with silt and mineral-rich soil carried down from the highlands. Over time, these valleys became cradles of life. Fertile lands where forests spread and ancient rivers carved their slow paths to the sea. But the sea itself was changing too. As the continents pressed together, smaller oceans vanished. The Pangaea Ocean now dominated almost the entire planet. A single, endless body of water circling a single, endless continent. Its waves lapped against Pangea's coasts. Its currents swirling around the world like blood around a beating heart. The balance of land and sea, that delicate rhythm that shapes weather, currents, and life, was now thrown into a new order. Along the edges of Pangea, the air was humid and alive. Warm winds rolled in from the ocean, feeding rain to forests that reached inland for hundreds of kilometers. But as you traveled deeper into the interior, the air grew dry. Moisture faded. Clouds became rare. Eventually, you would step into a world of heat and silence. The great continental heart of Pangea. Here, no ocean moderated the temperature. Days were scorching, nights freezing. Rain was a visitor so rare it was remembered in stone. In this desolation, red sand and cracked soil stretched for thousands of kilometers. The sunlight reflected from the ground in waves that shimmered like water. But there was none. Only dust, rock, and the ghost of rivers long gone. Geologists call these places continental interiors. But in Pangea's time, they were something far more extreme. Deserts of a scale our modern planet cannot match. These arid realms formed the supercontinent's burning heart. And yet, even here, life endured. It adapted, transformed, and learned to wait for the rains that came once in an age. If you could have stood there, you might have seen early reptiles sheltering beneath rocky outcrops. Their skin patterned to hide against the rust-colored ground. Insects with hard shells burrowed into the dust. Plants with deep roots clung to the edges of dry riverbeds. Their leaves small and waxy to conserve the precious water that lay hidden beneath the soil. When rare storms arrived, the transformation was breathtaking. Clouds rolled across the horizon. Lightning flashed in silence before the sound reached you. And for a few brief days, the desert bloomed. Seeds that had waited decades burst open in a frenzy of color and life. Rivers flowed again, carving paths that would soon dry once more. Then the heat returned. And the land fell back into sleep. The coasts told a different story. Here, Pangea was alive with abundance. Rivers fed the wetlands and swamps that bordered the ocean. And in those swampy forests, life thrived. Towering trees rose from the marshes, their trunks coated with moss and vines. Ferns spread beneath them, their leaves forming a dense green carpet that rustled in the humid wind. Everywhere there was motion, insects buzzing, amphibians croaking. Early reptiles sliding through the water in search of prey. The contrast between the edges and the center of Pangea was one of the great themes of its age. Coasts were alive, humid, and green. The interior was vast, silent, and red. Between them stretched plains and rivers. The arteries of this single colossal continent, carrying life and nutrients from one realm to the next. In these borderlands between wet and dry, evolution found its rhythm. Creatures that could survive in both worlds thrived here. Amphibians lingered near rivers and swamps, while reptiles ventured farther inland, no longer bound to the water. These small pioneers would shape the story of life to come, for they were the first to conquer true land. As the land came together, so too did the skies. On modern Earth, oceans break the air into swirling systems. currents of temperature and pressure that spin and split across continents. But in Pangea's time, with only one landmass, the winds stretched farther and more directly than ever before. They swept across thousands of kilometers without resistance, gathering dust from the deserts and carrying it toward the coasts. This dust was more than just debris. It carried minerals, nutrients that fed distant forests. It fertilized the ocean when it fell upon the water, creating vast blooms of plankton that formed the base of marine ecosystems. Even the lifeless deserts had a role in keeping the planet alive. From a distance, Pangea might have seemed still, a single continent beneath an unbroken sky. But up close, it was restless. Volcanoes still erupted along the seams where the land had fused. Mountains trembled with slow earthquakes. The crust shifted as the mantle below continued its timeless motion. The same forces that had created Pangea were already preparing to unmake it. Each eruption filled the air with ash, darkening the sky and cooling the planet for years at a time. Then the greenhouse gases released by that same volcanic fire would swing the climate back toward heat and drought. The Earth's climate was not yet stable. It pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the planet beneath it. And yet, life endured these changes. It always does. Even when continents collide. Even when skies darken or seas retreat. Life bends, reshapes, and finds new forms. In this age, it was no different. Forests spread across the floodplains of newly formed mountains. Seeds drifted on the wind to colonize the fresh volcanic soil. Rivers carved new valleys, creating corridors where amphibians and reptiles could move freely. The earth was rebuilding itself even as it destroyed. By now, Pangea stretched from pole to pole. A continent so vast that it reshaped the planet's climate system. Its equator was crossed by tropical belts of forest and swamp, while its poles were locked in ice. Between them lay deserts, grasslands, and mountains. No other time in history has seen such an enormous range of environments connected by continuous land. And all of it existed under one sky. From frozen southern plains to equatorial jungles. The same winds, the same clouds, the same rhythms of light and shadow touched them all. Life responded to these extremes with invention. Near the equator, in the damp forests and deltas, plants grew dense and lush. Seed ferns unfurled their fronds toward the light. Early conifers climbed skyward, their trunks coated with resin that glistened in the sun. These forests were alive with amphibians, insects, and small reptiles. Creatures adapted to warmth, moisture, and abundance. Farther inland, in the dry uplands, a different kind of ecosystem took hold. Plants evolved thicker bark and smaller leaves. Animals developed ways to conserve water. Some burrowed underground to escape the heat. Others roamed great distances in search of food and shade. It was a world of constant adaptation. A living experiment guided by the harsh logic of survival. Along the coasts, the Pangaea Ocean exerted its quiet influence. Its currents wrapped around the entire world, carrying warm water from the equator toward the poles and cool water back again. This circulation regulated the planet's temperature, making the coasts milder and the interiors harsher. The ocean's tides sculpted vast deltas. Its storms carved cliffs that would someday be buried beneath new land. Even as the land was joined, the seas remained the silent architects of balance. But perhaps the most extraordinary effect of Pangea's formation was the way it erased distance. For the first time in history, nearly every land on Earth was connected. Species that had evolved separately could now meet. Plants spread their seeds across the entire continent. Animals migrated without barriers. Predators followed prey from one horizon to another. Fossils today tell this story. Identical species of plants and reptiles are found in rock layers, now separated by entire oceans. Proof that once, they lived side by side. Pangea's unity allowed evolution to accelerate, mixing lineages that had once been isolated. Competition grew fierce, and adaptation became constant. It was a crucible, a planetary workshop in which the designs of future life were forged. But for all its greatness, Pangea was fragile. The same tectonic forces that had built it continued their motion. Heat gathered beneath the continent's heart, slowly stretching and thinning the crust. Fissures opened. Rifts formed. And though it would be millions of years before the first cracks widened into oceans, the process had already begun. For now, though, the world stood united. One land beneath one sky. Its deserts glowing red at sunset. Its coasts bathed in blue light from the endless Pangea. Mountains towered where continents had collided. Forests breathed out oxygen that drifted into every corner of the air. And deep below, the mantle turned. The slow heartbeat of a living world. If you could stand there at dusk, on the edge of one of those early mountains, you would see a world without borders. No distant continents to imagine. No lands beyond the horizon. Only Earth, one continuous expanse of stone, soil, forest, and fire. And as night fell, the stars above would have seemed endless, reflected faintly in lakes and shallow seas scattered across the supercontinent. In that silence, the planet would have felt infinite. Complete. Whole. But nothing on Earth stays whole for long. Pangea was both a masterpiece and a moment. A fleeting arrangement in a story that never stops changing. For beneath its surface, the future was already stirring. Pressure built along hidden rifts. New volcanoes simmered below. The seeds of separation had been planted. And one day, they would grow. For now, though, the world belonged to Pangea. It stood at the height of its power. A single, immense land wrapped by a single, immense ocean. The foundation of all the continents we know today. And from its mountains to its deserts. From its forests to its coasts. Life continued to write its story in the stone and the wind. Preparing for everything that was still to come. The earth had finally gathered itself. Every drifting fragment of land, every island and arc, every wandering continent had found its place in the vast embrace of Pangea. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, almost every mountain, plain, and valley on the planet was joined. The world had become one. But unity did not mean simplicity. Pangea's surface was a mosaic of climates and textures, each sculpted by distance, by wind, by the restless chemistry of air and stone. Its edges whispered with the rhythm of tides, while its heart beat to the dry pulse of dust and heat. The continental breath. From orbit, if such a view had been possible then, the planet would have looked strikingly divided. Half blue ocean, half ochre land. The border between them traced an irregular line of bays, deltas, and cliffs that wrapped around the globe. Beyond that edge, the continent inhaled and exhaled like a living thing. Each morning, sea breezes rolled inland, carrying moisture from Pangea, the single vast ocean that circled everything. Clouds condensed where the air rose over coastal mountains, spilling rain into rivers that hurried back to the sea. By afternoon, the land exhaled again, warm air rushing outward, drawing more moisture from the horizon. This breathing shaped the rhythm of life. It made some coasts lush with swamp and forest, while others lay parched in the shadows of highlands where rain could never reach. Even on a planet ruled by one continent, there were still contrasts as sharp as any ocean boundary. To walk from coast to center was to cross the history of climate itself. The green edges. Along the shores, Pangea shimmered with abundance. Here, the influence of the ocean was strongest. Warm, salt-tinged winds fed belts of dense vegetation. Forests stretched inland for hundreds of kilometers. Their trees rooted in deep black soil formed from volcanic ash and ancient floods. These coastal forests were the lungs of the supercontinent. Seed ferns unfurled wide fronds beneath towering conifers. Primitive horsetails rose in straight green columns along riverbanks. The air was thick with the scent of resin and decay, alive with the calls of amphibians hidden among moss-covered roots. Insects, larger than any that crawl today, hovered through shafts of light, their wings flashing bronze and gold as they caught the sun. Life along the coast was restless. The tides carved channels through the mudflats, filling them with shimmering fish and the wriggling shapes of early amphibians. Each tide brought nutrients from the sea and carried them back again, stitching the worlds of land and water together in a single eternal motion. If you had stood there, the horizon would have seemed endless. A blue curve merging with the sky. And behind you, an unbroken green wall of forest breathing mist into the air. Everything was connected, river to root, root to cloud, cloud to rain. The vast interior. But every step away from that coast drew you closer to another world entirely. The trees thinned. The ground hardened. Streams became trickles of dust. At last, the forest surrendered to open grasslands and then to desert. This was the heart of Pangea. A land so distant from the sea that the air itself forgot the taste of salt. Rain rarely crossed its borders. For months, sometimes years, the sky held nothing but light and heat. Here the sun dominated. Its glare bleached the stones pale and turned the horizon into a wavering mirage. Wind scoured the surface, lifting red dust that hung in the air for days. The earth cracked into patterns like a dried leaf. When storms did come, they arrived with a fury born of long silence. Lightning that danced from mountain to plain. Rain that fell in sheets and then vanished before it could soak the ground. Despite the harshness, the interior was not empty. It held its own kind of beauty, one born of endurance. Low shrubs with tough, leathery leaves clustered around dry riverbeds. Their roots probed deep for hidden water. Between them, early conifers spread like sentinels, their needles glinting silver under the sun. Creatures small and quick darted from shadow to shadow. Burrowing reptiles, insect hunters, scavengers of the dust. The interior deserts of Pangea dwarfed anything on modern Earth. Whole regions of what would one day become Africa, Asia, and North America lay under a single blanket of red sand. To cross it would have taken years. And perhaps no creature ever saw both edges in one lifetime. Yet even here, life persisted. That persistence would become the planet's habit for the next 200 million years. Rivers without borders. From the melting snows of young mountain ranges, rivers wound their way across the supercontinent. Without oceans to divide them, many flowed for thousands of kilometers, linking climates that today lie on separate continents. A stream born in what would one day become Europe might have joined another in Asia, their waters merging to carve a single valley before finally spilling into the Panthalasan coast. These rivers were lifelines, moving corridors of water. Their banks lined with vegetation and the tracks of ancient animals. They flooded in spring, retreated in summer, and left behind rich silt that fed forests and plains alike. Each flood deposited layers of minerals and organic matter that, over millions of years, would transform into coal and stone, the deep archives of the planet's memory. The pulse of wind. The atmosphere above this joined world moved differently than ours. With no oceans to scatter its currents, wind could sweep across the land in unbroken journeys. Monsoons grew to continental scales. In the equatorial zones, moist air rose in great spirals that carried storms for thousands of kilometers before breaking into rain. When the seasons shifted, those same winds reversed, dragging dry air from the deserts toward the coasts, painting the sky in red dust and dimming the sun. These global winds were sculptors. They carved dunes as high as small mountains. They spread fine sediment into layers that still rest beneath our feet today. And they carried life, spores, seeds, even insects, farther than any single storm can travel now. The breath of Pangea was steady and vast. Its rhythm recorded in the tilted lines of ancient rock, fire and soil. Where mountain chains pressed against the desert, volcanoes dotted the horizon. They were reminders that Pangea was still unfinished. Eruptions painted the sky black and turned daylight to copper. Ash rained across forests and plains, sometimes choking rivers, sometimes feeding them with nutrients. Out of destruction came renewal. When the ash settled and mixed with rain, it formed fertile soil. New plants took root almost immediately, pioneers that flourished in the mineral-rich ground. Forests returned in waves, their trunks rising through the mist of cooling steam. Even as fire consumed the land, life followed close behind. A constant cycle of death and rebirth that echoed across the supercontinent. A world of extremes. Pangea was a place of contradictions. It united the planet even as it divided climates. At its equator, tropical heat birthed rainforests dense enough to block out the sun. Toward its poles, glaciers still lingered, vast white plains stretching into darkness half the year. Between them lay belts of grassland, swamp, and desert, each shifting slightly with every tilt of the Earth's axis. No single creature could claim the entire continent. Instead, life specialized. Forest dwellers, desert survivors, mountain roamers, and coastal wanderers. Each adapting to the narrow slice of the world it could endure. But the boundaries between these zones were soft. There were no impassable oceans to keep them apart. Species met, mingled, and changed each other. That mingling became one of Pangea's greatest legacies. Fossils show identical animals once roaming places that today lie oceans apart. Their footprints, preserved in stone, cross what are now the Americas, Africa, and Europe alike. It was a single biological conversation spoken across the entire face of the earth. Light across the land. At dawn, the light of the young sun spilled across Pangea in an unbroken wave. There were no distant continents waiting for its return. No separate mornings rising in isolation. Every mountain, every tree, every ripple of sand caught the same growing glow. It must have been a sight of quiet majesty. One sunrise stretching across half the planet. By night, the stars shone harder and closer than we can imagine. Without city lights or moisture to dull them. They mirrored the desert floor with a brightness that seemed alive. For the creatures that stirred under that sky. Small reptiles searching for warmth, insects gliding on the still air. The universe itself was visible in every direction. This was the world as it once was. Complete, immense, breathing through wind and fire. A planet that had gathered all its fragments and, for a time, held them close in a single embrace. Yet even now, deep below, the restlessness remained. Heat swirled in the mantle, pressing upward, seeking the next weakness, the next fracture. Pangea's perfection was temporary. A pause in the endless cycle of creation and separation. For now, though, the earth stood still enough for life to flourish. Forests stretched across valleys carved by vanished seas. Rivers wound like silver threads through deserts the size of continents. And every gust of wind that crossed the land carried with it the same ancient message. That even in unity, change never sleeps. The land had found its shape, but the sky was still learning how to live above it. Every breath of wind, every drop of rain, every shimmer of heat that rose from the ground was part of a new experiment. The atmosphere of Pangea was not the same air we know now. It was thicker in some ages, thinner in others, and every shift in its balance left traces written into the stone. The weight of breath. To stand on Pangea and inhale would have been to taste a different world. The air carried more oxygen than ours, perhaps 30 parts in 100 instead of 21. It held the ghost of ancient forests and the smoke of volcanoes, the sweetness of resin and the dry sting of dust. Each breath was heavier, richer, almost metallic on the tongue. That abundance of oxygen changed everything. It made flames burn hotter, storms strike harder, and living bodies grow to improbable size. Insects, limited today by how far oxygen can diffuse through their small lungs, found themselves freed. Dragonflies the length of a man's forearm glided over the swamps. Millipede-like arthropods the size of dogs curled beneath fallen trees. The air itself fed their ambition. But abundance never lasts forever. As the supercontinent settled and its climates grew more extreme, volcanoes breathed carbon dioxide into the sky, drawing oxygen down. By the middle of the Permian period, that share may have fallen to half its earlier height. Breathing would have become harder. Lungs needed to work more fiercely. Life learned endurance again. The engine of weather. Air on a world with one continent moved in vast, simple loops. Warm currents rose over the equator, spilling heavy rain on belts of forest before sweeping dry toward the poles. Without oceans to break their path, those winds could circle the planet almost unimpeded. They scoured the deserts until the sand itself seemed to flow. They carried spores from the tropics to the tundra and dust from the heartland to the sea. Every season, the pattern shifted. When the sun leaned north, monsoons roared across the equatorial plains, turning rivers into brown torrents that cut new channels through the land. When it drifted south, the winds reversed, dragging drought in their wake. The supercontinent breathed with those monsoons. A single lung drawing in water and exhaling dust. Thunderstorms on Pangea must have been colossal. The updrafts could rise unbroken for miles. Lightning flashed between clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. And the sound rolled across the land for minutes after the strike. Each bolt split the air into plasma, igniting forests and starting fires that swept for weeks before rain or exhaustion put them out. Fire was not a disaster then, it was part of the planet's metabolism. It cleared old growth, freed nutrients, and made room for new life to take hold. Light and color. At dawn, the air often glowed amber. Volcanic aerosols, fine as smoke, scattered sunlight into colors richer than any modern sunrise. Dust from the deserts tinted the twilight red. Sometimes, after great eruptions, the sky stayed hazy for years, dimming the sun but painting the sunsets in layers of violet and gold. To creatures that depended on sight, The world was never the same color twice. Evolution followed light. Eyes sharpened, pigments deepened, and behaviors shifted with every cycle of shadow and flame. The carbon thread. Beneath the spectacle of clouds and color, a slower conversation unfolded between rock, plant, and air. Every eruption poured carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, warming the planet. Every forest drew that carbon down again, storing it in wood and soil. When trees fell and were buried in swamps, their bodies locked away the gas for millions of years. Coal seams that miners would someday cut into were already being written then. Chapters of climate captured in black stone. This exchange kept the world alive. Too much carbon, and heat would have scorched the coasts. Too little, and glaciers would have swallowed them. Pangea walked that narrow path by chance and by motion. The rise of mountains exposing fresh rock to weathering. The spread of forests pulling carbon from the sky. The endless balancing act of earth itself. The music of air. In that world, silence was rare. Even when the deserts lay still, wind whispered through rock and sand. In the forests, air hummed with the wings of insects and the creak of trees. Storms carried their own music. A low drone of thunder. The hiss of rain hitting leaves thick as leather. The sigh that came when the clouds finally broke apart. If you had listened closely, you might have heard the slow pulse of the planet behind those sounds. The deep rumble of distant volcanoes. The crack of shifting crust beneath the mountains. The heartbeat of heat moving upward through stone. That was the rhythm that all life on Pangea moved to. Whether it crawled, flew, or rooted itself in place. Life learns the sky. The changing air shaped the creatures that breathed it. When oxygen was high, bodies grew large and metabolisms ran fast. When it fell, survival favored lungs that squeezed every breath for meaning. Early reptiles learned to draw air deeper and slower. Their ribs expanding in complex patterns that would, long afterward, become the hallmark of mammals. Plants adapted too. In high-carbon ages they flourished. Their leaves broad and soft. When the air dried and thinned, they shrank their foliage, wrapped their seeds in shells, and waited through the lean seasons. Some evolved the first hints of flowers. Simple structures meant not for beauty but for certainty. Ensuring reproduction even when wind was scarce. Heat, cold, and memory. The global climate of Pangea was a pendulum. In the interior, summers baked the soil until it split. In winter, frost crept from the poles, freezing rivers solid. Along the coasts, the sea softened the extremes. Monsoons brought rain that refilled wetlands and forests. And the cycle began again. Those swings left fingerprints in stone. Bands of red iron-rich sediment for dry heat. Gray shale for floods. Coal for forests drowned and compressed under their own abundance. To a geologist, each layer is a line of music, a measure in the song of climate. To the living world, it was the rhythm of existence. The ocean's gift. Even though the ocean lay outside the continent's heart, it never stopped shaping the air. Currents in Pangea carried warm water toward the poles and cold water back again, driving winds that reached deep inland. When those winds met the rising mountains, they dropped their rain. Their moisture wrung out like breath on glass. Beyond those ranges lay the deserts. Their dryness born of the same seas that fed the forests. Every drop of rain that fell on Pangea had traveled half the planet to reach it. Every gust of wind had crossed mountain and plain. carrying stories from the sea. The world was connected not by roads or rivers, but by invisible currents that joined every region to every other. Air was the true map of that age. A living atmosphere. To live on Pangea was to exist inside a single shared breath. Dust from the deserts of the interior drifted thousands of kilometers to settle on coastal leaves. Volcanic gases rose into the stratosphere and circled the globe, cooling the tropics and warming the poles. Even the spores of mosses and fungi used those currents as highways, colonizing new lands that the continents had just pressed together. The atmosphere did more than move life. It remembered it. Each chemical change left a trace. A bit more carbon, a bit less oxygen. A thin layer of sulfur or ash that would one day tell scientists what the planet was feeling at that moment. The sky was not a ceiling, it was a diary. The fragile balance. Yet balance never lasts. As the continents pressed tighter, mountains rose higher, and volcanoes burned longer. The carbon cycle tilted toward heat again. The deserts expanded. Forests shrank to green corridors along rivers and coasts. Life retreated where it could find moisture. For many species, adaptation became a race against the air itself. Still, there was resilience. The plants that survived learned efficiency. New ways of trading water for gas. New shapes of leaf and stem. The animals that endured developed stronger hearts and quicker blood. Out of scarcity came innovation. And from innovation, endurance. The view from the edge. If you had stood on one of Pangea's young mountain ridges and looked out across the plains, the horizon would have been veiled in a faint red haze. That was the dust of the interior, drifting like smoke through the upper air. Below, valleys shimmered with heat. Rivers glinted like thin wires of silver. Far to the west, the ocean caught the sun, its surface flickering as if the planet itself were breathing light. Above you, the clouds stretched in long streaks, each marking a current that tied this ridge to lands thousands of kilometers away. The wind you felt on your face might have begun over a forest that would someday be Europe, or a desert that would become North America. You were standing in the center of everything. And everything was connected by the same moving sky. The lesson of air. The story of Pangea's atmosphere is the story of Earth's temperament. It shows how easily the planet changes. How quickly abundance can fade into scarcity and then return again. It reminds us that air is not empty space. It is a living system, woven from fire, water, and breath. When life fills it with oxygen, it gives that life back in storms, in warmth, in the spark of fire that keeps ecosystems turning. For millions of years this balance held. The supercontinent endured droughts, floods, and long ages of calm. Species rose and vanished. Forests grew and burned. And the sky above it all kept moving. A single restless blanket tying every piece of the planet together. In that air lay the promise of what would come next. Creatures that could walk farther, breathe deeper. And eventually, look up and wonder about the world that made them. The air of Pangea carried the first whispers of the future. Of a planet learning to know itself. The air above Pangea was restless, but the ground beneath it was coming alive. After ages of molten rock and shifting stone, the surface had cooled enough to host communities of movement, creatures that breathed, hunted, and dreamed in their own slow ways. The supercontinent was no longer only a landscape, it had become a living stage. The inheritors of dry land. In the world before, life had depended on water. Amphibians ruled the swamps and deltas, their skin slick and fragile, their eggs anchored in ponds that rose and vanished with the seasons. But the heart of Pangea offered no mercy for such dependence. Deserts stretched beyond sight, and rivers sometimes vanished into sand. Only those who could carry water inside themselves would survive. That challenge gave birth to the reptiles, the first true masters of dry ground. Their skin was armored with scales that sealed in moisture. Their eggs were wrapped in leathery shells, small vessels of independence. Each hatchling carried a private ocean within its thin walls, a world in miniature. From that simple invention came freedom. Freedom to wander, to climb, to bask under the sun without fear of drying into dust. They were not yet the giants that would come later. Most were small, quick-moving hunters that scurried between roots and rocks. Their shapes varied, some long-bodied and serpentine, others short and broad like squat lizards. They hunted the insects that thrived in the warmth and left winding trails in the red sand. Each movement wrote a new line of adaptation across the continent's face. The architects of warm blood. Among these early reptiles were the synapsids, creatures that would one day give rise to mammals. To us they might seem alien, long tails, sprawling legs, heads held low. But inside them, quiet revolutions were taking place. Their bones grew lighter, their teeth began to specialize, some for cutting, some for grinding. They were learning efficiency, learning warmth. Some could already generate a little heat of their own. A trick that freed them from the strict schedule of the sun. At dawn, while the air was still cold and other reptiles waited for light to wake them, the synapsids moved. They hunted by scent, their breath steaming in the morning chill, their hearts beating faster than the age before had allowed. They were the pioneers of endurance. The forest stage. Much of their story played out along the margins of forest and plain. In the shadowed swamps near the coasts, tree trunks rose like pillars. Moss and lichen coated every surface. Sunlight fell in narrow blades through the canopy. And along those beams crept creatures of the new world, scaled, furred, feathered in the faintest beginnings of insulation. Each forest was an orchestra of sound. Cicadas droned in the heat. Frogs called from shallow pools. Above it all, the slow creak of branches marked the rhythm of the wind. Predators and prey learned to listen. A snapped twig meant danger, a still silence, opportunity. Evolution sharpened ears, widened eyes, lengthened legs. Every sense became a tool. Hunters and wanderers. Out on the open plains, where rivers cut silver scars through the red soil, larger reptiles roamed. Some were lumbering plant-eaters, their bellies close to the ground as they fed on ferns and low shrubs. Others were agile predators that stalked them, sleek, muscular, powered by lungs that pulled deep breaths of oxygen-rich air. Their footprints pressed into the mud and dried there. Fossilized messages that would one day tell scientists where the chase had run. The prey animals moved in herds. A strategy born from fear but refined by intelligence. Eyes on the sides of their heads watched the horizon while they grazed. Nostrils tested the air for the scent of approaching teeth. They were small, but they were learning community. A lesson that would echo through countless species to come. Fire and shadow. Every few decades, lightning struck the forests and set them ablaze. Flames raced along fallen leaves, leapt into dry trunks, and painted the night orange. For the creatures of Pangea, fire was both terror and renewal. Those that could flee found safety in rivers or underground burrows. Those that could not often perished. And from their ashes, the soil grew rich again. Within weeks of a burn, green shoots returned. Ferns unrolled fresh fronds through the charred debris. Insects swarm to feed on decay. Reptiles follow to feed on the insects. The circle of life on Pangea was quick and ruthless. A constant rehearsal for resilience. The tyrants of the rivers. Along the waterways, another lineage thrived, the temnospondyls, amphibians built like crocodiles. They lurked half-submerged in the shallows, eyes just above the surface, jaws lined with teeth like needles. When a smaller creature came to drink, the water exploded into violence. These predators were relics of an older world but perfectly suited to the new one. They ruled the margins between water and land. Proof that the past still had a place in the age of reptiles. The rivers themselves were wide and slow. Their currents heavy with silt from distant mountains. They braided and shifted with every flood. Sometimes cutting new paths across the plains, sometimes swallowing forests whole. To live near them was to live on moving ground. The march of adaptation. As climates grew harsher, diversity blossomed. Evolution favors pressure, and Pangea applied it endlessly. Where heat pressed hardest, some reptiles learned to dig deep burrows to escape it. Where drought returned each year, others stored water in their bodies or laid eggs timed to the brief rains. Some grew sails, tall spines along their backs that caught sunlight like living solar panels, warming them in the morning and cooling them at night. The most famous of these, Dimetrodon, prowled the floodplains like a shadow from another age. Its sail flickering against the horizon as it hunted. The fossil record captures their experiments in bone. New joints, new teeth, new senses. Each innovation was a step closer to the creatures that would inherit the world after Pangea fell apart. The hidden architects. While the great reptiles claimed the visible stage, smaller engineers worked unseen. Insects tunneled through dead wood, turning it into soil. Fungi broke down fallen trees, releasing nutrients that fed the next generation of plants. Burrowing animals aerated the ground, mixing minerals and organic matter. Every handful of earth was alive with construction. Each microscopic act shaping the continent more than any mountain could. This invisible labor kept the atmosphere breathable and the forests growing. It was the quiet heartbeat beneath the louder dramas of tooth and claw. The long droughts. Not every chapter was kind. As volcanic activity increased, ash darkened the sky. Rain failed. Lakes evaporated into salt flats that glittered white under the sun. Whole ecosystems withered. Fossils show sudden gaps, species that vanished without descendants. Yet others adapted, shrinking in size, changing diet, waiting in burrows for years until the climate softened again. Extinction and survival walked hand in hand across the Red Plains. Signs of intelligence. Among the survivors, certain synapsids began showing behaviors that hinted at the future. They cared for their young, guarded eggs, and perhaps even used simple communication, hisses, clicks, low vibrations carried through the ground. Their skulls reveal larger cavities for smell and hearing. Their limbs more upright for efficient travel. These were the earliest experiments in social life. The first glimmers of cooperation beyond instinct. In them lay the blueprint for mammals yet to come. Warmth, awareness, endurance. They were not dominant yet. But they were patient. The evening of the Permian sun. Toward the end of the day, Pangea's skies burned orange and violet. Dust from the deserts hung suspended in the upper air, turning the light soft and strange. Across the plains, shadows lengthened. Herds gathered near the rivers. Predators watched from the ridges. And somewhere, in the cooling sand, eggs pulsed with life. Night brought silence but not peace. The ground still trembled now and then from far-off quakes. Volcanoes flickered at the horizon like distant lightning. Yet under that uncertain sky, the creatures of the supercontinent continued their endless rhythm, feeding, breeding, surviving. They did not know that they were living on borrowed time. That deep within the earth the first stresses of breakup were beginning. That in a few million years the land itself would tear apart. For now, the world belonged to them. To the quiet footsteps of reptiles in the dust. To the whisper of wind through sails of bone. To the steady beat of hearts learning to keep their own warmth. The stage was set for both triumph and tragedy. Life had reached a new height of complexity. And the planet beneath it was about to remind everything that nothing lasts forever. For a brief stretch of deep time, the planet seemed content. The fires of formation had cooled, the skies cleared, and the surface of Pangea pulsed with color. Forests thickened along its coasts. Rivers braided through its plains like silver veins. Desert still burned in the heartland, yet even there, pockets of green clung to life after every storm. This was the high season, the age when the supercontinent breathed at its fullest. The kingdom of green. Along the humid belts near the equator, rain fell in long slow curtains that could last for weeks. The ground was dark and rich, heavy with the scent of decay and growth. Tree ferns unfurled into umbrellas of green. Seed ferns tangled their roots with moss and early conifers. Some trunks reached 30 meters before the first branch appeared. Their crowns catching the sunlight that never touched the forest floor. The air shimmered with humidity and with movement. The rustle of leaves, the glide of insects, the drip of condensation from every surface. These forests were the Earth's lungs. They pulled carbon from the air and exhaled oxygen in abundance. Each breath of wind carried the chemistry of life itself. The dense canopy trapped warmth and moisture, creating a greenhouse within a greenhouse. Creatures thrived in its layered world, amphibians lurking in pools. Reptiles basking on logs. And arthropods clinging to bark thicker than a man's arm. When lightning struck, it rarely reached the ground. The rain smothered fire before it could spread. Instead, the cycle of life and death was governed by water and rot. Fallen trees sank into swamp mud, slowly turning to peat and, over millions of years, to coal. The forests built their own future fossil record with every fallen leaf. Plains of motion. Beyond the humid core, the forests opened into broad grass-like meadows, though true grasses had not yet evolved. Here grew low seed ferns and cycads with thick armored trunks. Across these plains moved herds of herbivorous reptiles. Their bodies barrel-shaped to hold vast stores of food and water. They walked on sprawling legs that kept their bellies just above the ground. Each step left a print the size of a plate in the damp soil. Predators followed at a distance. Leaner and faster, guided by scent and the shimmer of movement against the heat. Some hunted in pairs, driving prey toward hidden ambushes. Others waited motionless until hunger overcame caution. The air trembled with the low bellows of communication. Warning, threat, invitation. Life had learned language of a kind. Made not of words but of rhythm and vibration. When the sun reached its zenith, everything slowed. Creatures sought shade under cycads. Or buried themselves in mud to escape the heat. Wind carried the faint smell of resin and dust. And above it all soared dragonflies large enough to startle a modern bird. Their wings glittered with rainbow light as they rode the thermal currents that rose from the plains. Mountains of fire. Far inland, the earth still burned. The seams that welded the supercontinent together were restless. bleeding magma through cracks that stitched the landscape in red. Volcanoes dotted the interior like torches in a vast arena. They smoked constantly, painting the horizon in faint blue haze during the day and orange glow at night. When one erupted, the consequences reached half a world away. Ash darkened the sky. Temperatures fell. Rains turned acid. Forests died back in patches, only to recover again when the air cleared. Each eruption was a rehearsal for the catastrophe that would one day end the age, but no creature yet understood the pattern. The web expands. With land connected from pole to pole, species spread farther than ever before. Fossils of identical plants now lie buried across what would become Africa, South America, India, and Antarctica, evidence of a single continuous ecology. Seed ferns carried by wind and water colonized every corner of the supercontinent. Reptiles roamed from one climate zone to another, their adaptability tested and refined by each new environment. The mixing of lineages sparked an explosion of forms. Some evolved armor, bony plates along their backs to deflect teeth. Others grew sails or crests for display. A few developed early versions of fur or filament. Not yet for warmth but as sensory tools, detecting vibration in the air. The world was inventing itself in every direction. The empire of the synapsids. At the top of many food chains stood the synapsids. The warm-blooded reptiles that would one day give rise to mammals. They came in many shapes. Some heavy and slow. Others swift and agile. Their eyes faced forward. Their teeth varied in shape and purpose, evidence of new diets and strategies. The most famous among them was Dimetrodon. Its sailback silhouette cutting across the Permian horizon. It hunted fish in shallow waters and smaller reptiles on the plains. That sail, lined with blood vessels, acted as a living radiator, absorbing heat at dawn, releasing it at dusk. With this adaptation, Dimetrodon could hunt at times of day when other reptiles were sluggish. It was a master of thermodynamics long before science named the term. Elsewhere, smaller synapsids filled niches that mammals would later claim. Some burrowed, others climbed. They fed on insects, roots, and the soft eggs of neighbors. Many raised their young, guarding nests from predators. In their behavior lay the seeds of tenderness, the quiet revolution that would define mammals millions of years later. Rivers of abundance. The great rivers of Pangea linked every ecosystem. They carried ash from volcanoes to the sea, minerals from mountains to deltas, and sometimes entire forests torn loose by floods. Along their banks thrived swamps dense with life. Here the balance between water and land was delicate, and the diversity of species unmatched. Amphibians the size of crocodiles shared these wetlands with smaller reptiles. Fish darted between submerged logs, and insects swarmed in clouds so thick they dimmed the light. Birdsong did not yet exist, but the air was loud with chirp, croak, and hiss. The smell was one of peat and salt, the aroma of creation itself. When the rains withdrew, the rivers shrank into braided channels that glimmered in the sun. Animals gathered at the remaining pools, their tracks overlapping until the ground became a map of movement. Each drought tested endurance. Each flood erased the traces and began the story again. The pulse of the poles. At the planet's southern end, cold still ruled. Glaciers stretched across parts of Gondwana, advancing and retreating with the rhythm of the ages. Even there, life persisted. Mosses clung to rock faces exposed by melting ice. Primitive reptiles hunted in the brief polar summers, their blood thick and slow to hold warmth. During the long dark winters, they slept in burrows or under the frozen mud, waiting for the light to return. The north was warmer but equally restless. Seasonal storms swept from the Panthalasan coast across endless plains. Lightning flashed for hours, its reflections dancing on pools left by monsoon rain. The sky itself seemed alive, its patterns of cloud and color changing faster than any creature could follow. The first shadows. Yet beneath the beauty, imbalance was growing. Volcanoes belched carbon dioxide faster than the forests could absorb it. The planet warmed. Deserts expanded outward from the center. Lakes dried. The lush belts of green that had wrapped the equator began to fragment. Where water vanished, salt crusted the ground in white scales. For creatures adapted to plenty, these changes came like whispers of doom. Herds dwindled, eggs failed to hatch. Fossil layers recorded as a slow decline, species appearing less often. Their remains thinner, their bones more fragile. Life did not know it yet. But the great equilibrium of Pangea was faltering. The art of survival. Still, evolution refused surrender. Some animals learned to migrate vast distances following the seasons. Others turned nocturnal, avoiding the heat of day. Plants shortened their life cycles, blooming and seeding in a single brief wet season. Insects adapted to dry air by sealing their bodies with waxy coatings. Everywhere, the struggle reshaped the participants. The survivors of these small crises would become the ancestors of the next age. They carried inside them the resilience of catastrophe. Genes tempered by drought, hunger, and fire. When the final trial came, only they would remain to inherit what the world would become. Evening on the supercontinent. Imagine standing at the end of one of those long Permian days. The sun, swollen and red, sinks behind volcanic hills. Dust drifts across the plain in copper veils. The air smells of resin and distant thunder. A herd of plant-eaters moves slowly toward a river that has nearly dried. Their shadows stretching across the cracked mud. Somewhere beyond sight, a predator lifts its head to the wind. Above them, the first stars appear. Hard points of light through the haze. The planet breathes out heat. The forests release their scent. And night gathers over a world that does not yet know it stands on the edge of change. Soon, the fires beneath the crust will awaken in earnest. They will pour poison into the air and choke the seas with darkness. The high season of life will give way to silence. But for now, for this moment in deep time, Pangea glows with vitality. It is a living continent beneath a living sky. A masterpiece balanced on the thin line between abundance and collapse. The world did not end with a single explosion or a single day. It ended in whispers, in the slow darkening of skies, in the faint stench of poison drifting through the air, in the sound of rivers drying beneath the sun. The earth does not die quickly. It unravels, thread by thread. For millions of years, Pangea had been a masterpiece of balance. Its forests breathed out the oxygen that filled its air. Its volcanoes and oceans traded carbon like partners in an ancient dance. Its creatures had learned to live with drought, with flood, with fire. But beneath the crust, the planet's pulse was quickening. The stirring beneath the crust. Far below the surface, heat began to gather. Mantle plumes, vast pillars of molten rock rising from deep within the earth, pressed upward beneath the continent's heart. The crust bulged, cracked, and bled. At first, the eruptions were distant and scattered, nothing the planet hadn't seen before. But then, in the region that would one day become Siberia, the land split open. Over tens of thousands of years, lava poured from the earth in quantities beyond imagination. Not a single mountain or cone, but entire provinces of fire. Rivers of molten rock spread for hundreds of kilometers. Layer upon layer. Burying forests, plains, and rivers beneath an ocean of stone. This was not a single eruption. It was an age of eruption. The birth of the Siberian Traps. One of the largest volcanic events in the history of the planet. The air filled with ash. The sky glowed a dim red even at noon. And with every pulse of fire, more gases rose into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane. Each invisible, each deadly in its own way. The poisoned air. At first, life adapted as it always had. Plants thickened their leaves to resist the acid rains. Animals sought cooler valleys or deeper burrows. But the poison did not pass. It lingered, building year by year. Sulfur dioxide from the eruptions mixed with moisture. Falling as acid rain that stripped the forests bare. Rivers ran black with minerals leached from stone. Fish suffocated as their waters turned toxic. On land, spores replaced seeds. The mark of forests reverting to primitive forms after devastation. The oxygen content of the air began to fall. It dropped slowly at first, then sharply. Leaving even strong creatures gasping. Insects that once dominated the skies vanished, their large bodies suddenly impossible to sustain. Amphibians, already clinging to the margins of water, were among the first to fail. The fever of carbon. As the eruptions continued, carbon dioxide thickened in the atmosphere like an invisible blanket. Global temperatures rose, first by degrees, then by entire seasons. The once temperate plains turned to deserts. The deserts became salt flats. Rain came less often, and when it did, it brought only more heat. The oceans warmed as well. Currents slowed. Their circulation patterns collapsing under the weight of heat. Oxygen dissolved less easily in the water. Dead zones spread outward from the coasts. Choking fish, corals, and plankton alike. Even the waves seemed slower, heavier. As though the seas themselves were suffocating. Methane, trapped for ages in frozen seabeds, began to thaw and bubble to the surface. This gas was even more potent than carbon dioxide, amplifying the greenhouse effect until the world entered a feedback loop of heat and decay. The planet had caught a fever it could not break. Forests of ash. In the equatorial regions, the once verdant forests of Pangea collapsed. Rain no longer came in steady rhythms. When it did arrive, it came in violent bursts, storms so fierce they uprooted trees and scoured the soil clean. Between these tempests lay months, sometimes years, of drought. The rivers that had once fed the lowlands turned into winding threads of salt and mud. The great coal forests, which had taken millions of years to grow, dried out and burned. Ash fell for decades. Forests turned to wasteland. The air tasted of smoke and iron. Each spark of lightning ignited miles of dead vegetation. The fires released still more carbon into the sky, feeding the very cycle that destroyed them. The Earth's surface had become its own furnace. By the time the smoke cleared, half the planet's forests were gone. And without them, the atmosphere began to suffocate. The ocean's last breath. Even the oceans, the ancient keepers of life, could not escape. As the water warmed, oxygen dwindled. Microbes that thrived without it took their place. Releasing hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas that drifted upward into the air. The surface of the sea turned green with bacteria and purple with sulfur-loving algae. Fish floated belly up. Coral reefs dissolved. The great marine food web, built over hundreds of millions of years, unraveled in less than a geological moment. Geologists can still read this story in the stone. Thin layers of black shale rich with carbon. The residue of dead oceans sealed beneath the weight of time. In those layers, the fossils simply stop. It is the signature of absence. A page torn from the book of life. The vanishing. On land, the story was the same. The plains of Pangea fell silent. Where once herds had moved in endless procession, only dust stirred. Lakes shrank to puddles, then disappeared. Ferns gave way to barren soil. Insects, which had ruled the skies for eons, nearly vanished. Up to 95% of all marine species, and 70% of land species, disappeared into extinction. The great synapsids, masters of the Permian plains, died in droves. Some were trapped in mud as rivers turned to sludge. Others starved when their prey was gone. Even the hardiest scavengers could not endure the chain reaction of collapse. Entire ecosystems vanished, leaving only skeletons and shadows. The Earth's long silence. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the planet fell quiet. The wind still moved. The seas still shifted. But the chorus of life was gone. Only microbes thrived, the ancient survivors of heat, acid, and darkness. They colonized the empty spaces left behind by greater creatures, painting the world in thin films of green and purple where forests once stood. In geological time, this silence lasted only an instant. Perhaps a few million years. But to the Earth, it was long enough to forget. Long enough for the carbon to sink again into stone. Long enough for the seas to clear. For the air to thin. For the soil to begin whispering the language of life once more. The resilience beneath the ash. Beneath the scorched ground. In cracks and caves untouched by fire. Small creatures endured. Burrowing synapsids slept through the worst of it. Their bodies slowing almost to stillness. Tiny reptilian ancestors found refuge in the shade of fallen trees. Feeding on insects that never stopped crawling. Even in the deep ocean. A few species of shellfish clung to survival in isolated pockets where water still held breath. They were the keepers of continuity. The hidden seeds of the next world. When the air finally cleared and rain returned, they emerged to find a planet reshaped. The forests were gone. The air thinner. The climate unpredictable. But they began again. Life always does. A planet remade. The Permian extinction had wiped the slate nearly clean. It was both an ending and an invitation. In the stillness that followed, new forms of life began to experiment. Reptiles diversified into strange shapes. Some grew lighter. Their limbs drawn beneath them for speed. Others took to the water again, reclaiming the element their ancestors had left behind. The world was entering a new chapter. One that would give rise to the age of the dinosaurs. But that was still far ahead. For now, the Earth was rebuilding. Breathing slowly. Learning to live again after its own near death. The lesson of collapse. Standing at the edge of this ancient catastrophe. It is tempting to see only destruction. Yet in the patterns of recovery lies the deeper story. The Earth did not end, it changed. It shed the skin of one era to make room for another. Every extinction is also a beginning. A reset written in magma and time. The skies over Pangaea would clear again. New forests would take root in the ashes. The air would grow gentle, the rain steady. And life, in its quiet persistence, would fill the silence once more. For now, though, imagine the world as it was in the final twilight of the Permian. The horizon glows red from fires that never die. Ash falls like snow. The wind carries the faint, metallic taste of extinction. And somewhere in the distance, under the weight of smoke and time, the planet waits. Silent, patient. Ready to begin again. The Earth is a patient survivor. Even in silence, it is never still. After the long night of the Permian extinction, when almost all breath had ceased and the world lay smothered in its own ashes, the planet began to stir again. Rain fell for the first time in decades, maybe centuries. It hissed against the cooling stone. Steam rising from the ground where lava still glowed beneath the crust. The air, once thick with poison, thinned as the winds carried the remnants of sulfur and smoke into the upper sky. Clouds formed and broke. The sound of water returned to the land. Life, which had hidden in shadows and soil, began to move. The first green. In the beginning, the world was brown. Mountains wore a thin crust of dust instead of trees. Rivers ran gray with silt. The oceans were green with bacteria, their surface shimmering with oily films of microbial bloom. But on land, something small began to change. Moss. Lichen. Tiny patches of green appearing on the sides of rocks, turning the dead stone into something alive again. They were the first to return, the quiet engineers of rebirth. They broke down minerals, trapped dust, and began to weave the first fragile soil. In that soil, spores took root. Soon ferns rose, delicate and stubborn, their fronds unfurling toward a sun they had not seen in ages. They grew where the ash was soft and the air still heavy with carbon. The forests of the new world began as whispers in the cracks of the old one. The survivors awaken. Beneath the ground, life had endured in secret. Burrowing reptiles and small synapsids had slept through the worst, their hearts slowing until time itself seemed to forget them. Now, as warmth returned and food began to reappear, they emerged blinking into the strange light of a changed world. They found no towering forests, no herds, no songs of insects. Only emptiness, and opportunity. In that emptiness, evolution accelerated. Those that survived the collapse now faced little competition. Every niche, every role, every source of food was open again. From these survivors would come the architects of the next age. New reptiles, new hunters, new hopes. Among them were the archosaurs, a lineage of agile, upright reptiles with long legs and sharp eyes. At first, they were small and swift, feeding on insects and scavenging along riverbanks. But they carried within them the blueprints of giants. Given time, they would become the rulers of the planet. Given time, they would become dinosaurs. Oceans of renewal. While land rebuilt itself grain by grain, the seas also began to heal. The sulfurous green film that had covered them for centuries faded as sunlight returned. Oxygen seeped back into the water. First in shallow coastal zones, then deeper each millennium. New plankton evolved. Tiny spheres of life that turned sunlight into sugar, breathing oxygen into the ocean once more. From these invisible architects rose the first modern food webs. Small shellfish grazed on plankton. Predatory fish followed them. The balance was delicate, easily broken. But it was balanced nonetheless. Life, once nearly erased, was finding its rhythm again. Coral, long extinct during the Great Dying, returned in new forms. These early Triassic reefs were not yet the elaborate cathedrals of later ages. But they shimmered with color, orange, blue, gold. As the sea rediscovered beauty. Each reef was a proclamation. The planet still remembers how to build. The sky clears. For the first time in millions of years. The horizon was blue again. The smoke that had hung over Pangea since the volcanic cataclysm finally thinned into soft, translucent veils. Sunlight returned with unfiltered brilliance. It warmed the plains, melted the last glaciers in the south, and set the stage for a gentler climate. The Earth was still hotter than before the extinction. But now its temperature was steady. The great feedback loops had slowed. Rain began to fall in regular seasons again. Winds carved new dunes across the deserts. The balance was fragile. But it was there. And life only needs a moment of calm to begin again. The new order. The old world of the Permian had been one of dominance. Huge reptiles, lush forests, crowded ecosystems. The new world of the Triassic was quieter. Filled with pioneers and experiments. Where forests had once stretched endlessly. New landscapes emerged, open plains, scrublands, and salt flats. Plants adapted to dryness. Evolving thicker leaves and deeper roots. They formed the first early coniferous woodlands. A sign that the earth was ready to grow tall again. Insects returned in swarms. Beetles, dragonflies, and the ancestors of modern crickets filled the air with a soft droning hum. They pollinated the new plants, spread spores and seeds. And once more wove the delicate fabric of ecology across the land. And in their shadows moved the new rulers of the ground. Reptiles of every kind and shape. Some were small, swift, and insect-eating. Others were stocky herbivores with tusks or beaks. Still others evolved into predators with long jaws and sharp teeth. The prototypes of crocodiles and dinosaurs alike. The Earth was experimenting again. Each generation brought a new design. Some lasting millions of years. Others vanishing in an instant. But the direction was clear. Speed, agility, intelligence. Life was learning to move with purpose again. The return of the rivers. Rivers carved new paths through the ash and basalt left by the ancient eruptions. They glittered beneath a brighter sun. Their banks lined with reeds and early conifers. Frogs croaked in the shallows. Descendants of survivors that had never given up their link to water. Fish flashed beneath the surface. Their scales reflecting the light in metallic blues and greens. At night, when the air cooled, mist rose from the rivers like breath. In that mist moved the new hunters, small archosaurs. Eyes gleaming with reflected starlight. Their footsteps were silent. Their movements fluid. The age of amphibians was over. The age of reptiles had truly begun. The return of color. As vegetation returned, so too did color. The land was no longer the monotone gray of ash and rock. Patches of green thickened into meadows. Conifers added deep tones of blue-green. Moss and lichen painted the stones with yellow and orange. Even the soil changed. Darkening as life turned dust back into earth. Skies at sunrise flared with crimson and gold. In the thin, clean air, stars at night looked sharper than ever before. The world had been broken, but not defeated. Every shade of light felt like a promise. The first great rebuilding. Over millions of years, this fragile beginning strengthened. The small reptiles diversified, spreading into every corner of Pangea. They evolved into early crocodiles. Slender hunters built for ambush along the riverbanks. Others became gliders, stretching membranes of skin between their limbs to drift from tree to tree. Still others began to walk upright on two legs, their strides quick and balanced. They were the ancestors of creatures that would one day shake the earth with their steps. Among them, a few species began to show signs of something new. A spark of intelligence. Their movements were measured, their eyes alert. They watched their surroundings not only for survival, but with something like curiosity. Evolution had begun to favor awareness. Meanwhile, beneath the same forests, tiny burrowers carried forward the lineage of the mammal-like synapsids. They lived in shadows now, feeding on insects and hiding from the growing reptilian predators above. Their bones were lighter, their blood warmer. They carried the memory of endurance, and the future of mammals. The reconnected seas. As Pangea healed, its coastlines changed again. Erosion from young rivers washed sediment into the ocean, forming deltas rich with nutrients. Marine life flourished in these new environments. Cephalopods, early relatives of squids and ammonites, filled the seas with spiraling shells and flickering movement. Predatory fish evolved sleek bodies built for speed. Reptiles followed them into the water. The first marine reptiles, slender and paddle-limbed, reclaiming the domain their ancestors had left behind. The sea became alive once more with light and motion. Coral reefs spread. Plankton bloomed in pale blue clouds. Whispers of new ecosystems drifted across the waves. The earth had rebuilt itself from the edge of nothingness. It was, in every sense, a resurrection. The fragile peace. But the scars of the great dying remained. Fossil soils show signs of instability, sudden floods, long droughts, and brief cooling periods. The Earth's systems were still recalibrating, still learning how to breathe evenly again. The mantle beneath Pangea remained restless. The continents creaked and stretched. Though the sky was blue, the future was already moving beneath the crust. For now, though, the balance held. Rain fell when it was needed. Forests spread. Oceans glimmered. For the first time since the world's near death, Earth could exhale. The sound of return. Imagine standing on one of Pangea's new coasts at dawn. The tide murmurs softly against black volcanic stone. Mist hangs low over the water. Somewhere inland, the first forests whisper in the wind. Insects hum. Small reptiles dart between ferns. A fish leaps, scattering droplets into the air like sparks. This is not the same world that died. It is younger, leaner, more deliberate. Every sound feels like a promise kept. Every sunrise is the planet remembering its own light. The Earth has always known how to heal. And from this rebirth will come a new lineage of creatures. Ones that will rise taller, walk faster, and rule longer than anything before them. The world has entered the Triassic. The first chapter of a new age. And though it will take millions of years, this is where the dinosaurs begin. The world that emerged from the ashes of the Permian was younger than its age. Every river, every forest, every mountain was freshly carved. Time had wiped the slate clean. And the earth began to draw again, this time in bolder strokes. The long silence was over. The air rang with new voices, the calls of reptiles, the hum of insects, the low rustle of leaves stirred by warm wind. Life was not merely recovering, it was reinventing itself. And its stage was still Pangea. Vast, united, and restless beneath the stars. The dawn of the Triassic. The year was somewhere around 250 million years ago. The land was still scarred from the fires of the past. But already the traces of devastation were fading. Volcanic soil, rich in minerals, had become fertile ground for new forests. Ferns gave way to conifers, conifers to cycads, cycads to the first true seed-bearing trees. Green returned to the horizon, painting valleys and plains that had been gray for ages. The rivers that once ran black with ash now ran clear. And with them came the heartbeat of renewal. The Earth's climate had steadied, hot, yes, but predictable. Monsoons returned to the coasts. And the interior deserts softened with seasonal rains. Under this new sun, Pangea was a continent in bloom. Architects of evolution. In this new world, opportunity belonged to the small. The giants of the Permian were gone. And evolution's workshop was filled with creatures scarcely larger than a hand. But they multiplied quickly. They changed easily. Each generation carried experiments in bone and muscle. The raw material of innovation. Among them were the archosaurs. A family of agile, upright reptiles that would define the next 200 million years. They were built for movement. Legs positioned beneath their bodies. Lungs efficient enough to fuel long chases. Some took to the water, others to the air. And one lineage learned to rule the land. They were the ancestors of dinosaurs. The earliest dinosaurs were small. Creatures no taller than a person's knee. They ran on two legs. Their tails stretched behind them like living counterweights. They hunted insects, scavenged carcasses. And sometimes ate plants when nothing else would do. But they were fast. And in a world where survival depended on speed and adaptability. That was enough. The reign of the archosaurs. For millions of years, dinosaurs lived in the shadows of their cousins. The great crocodile-line archosaurs. Massive, armored beasts that ruled rivers and swamps. These were the first Rauisuchians. Predators with skulls longer than a man's height and teeth like knives. They walked on four limbs but could rise on two to strike. Their jaws closing with a sound like breaking stone. Wherever water flowed, they waited. They were the apex hunters of their age. Dominant, adaptable, and patient. Yet even their reign would not last. The smaller, faster, and more intelligent dinosaurs were already learning to outlast them. In time, endurance would prove more powerful than strength. The pulse of the land. Pangea was alive again with motion. Forests carpeted the lowlands. Rivers carved deep channels that glinted under the sun. Deserts, though vast, now pulsed with life each season when rains returned. Insects filled the air. Their humming a constant backdrop to the cries of reptiles and amphibians. Everywhere, the rhythm of the planet had returned. To the west, great volcanic plateaus shimmered in heat. To the east, plains rolled unbroken to the horizon. The continents had not yet drifted apart. One could still walk from the lands that would become Africa to those that would be Asia without crossing a sea. The world felt boundless. As though it could never be undone. The forests of the Triassic. The forests of the Triassic were unlike any before them. They were more open, more sunlit. Their trees spaced apart like pillars in a vast hall. Cycads rose with armored trunks and feathery crowns. Ginkgo-like trees unfurled fan-shaped leaves that glittered in the breeze. Conifers towered over them all, their needles whispering softly as the wind passed through. Beneath this canopy, the ground was alive with small movement. Lizards darting through ferns. Early mammals scurrying in burrows. And young dinosaurs testing their speed in playful chases. It was a world of beginnings. Every step forward a rehearsal for what evolution would perfect later. The ocean returns to song. While life on land was experimenting, the seas had already mastered recovery. By now, the oceans teemed again with color and form. Reefs bloomed with corals and sponges. Schools of fish darted like silver clouds. Nautiloids with spiral shells drifted through the deep, their tentacles tasting the current. And above them swam something new. Sleek reptiles with long necks and paddle-shaped limbs. The first ichthyosaurs. They looked like dolphins but were no mammals. They were descendants of land reptiles that had returned to the sea. Their eyes were enormous, built to see in dim light far below the surface. They hunted fish and squid with precision, their movements smooth as thought. Once again, the ocean had found its hunters. The sky awakes. For the first time, the air itself became a home. Among the forests and cliffs, new creatures stretched membranes of skin between their elongated fingers, and took to the wind. They were the pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to truly fly. Their wings caught the thermals rising from the warm ground, and they soared for hours. Eyes sharp for fish or carrion far below. Some were no larger than a sparrow. Others, in time, would reach the size of small aircraft. They opened the final dimension of life, the sky. And with it, the earth became a fully three-dimensional world of motion. The mammalian shadow. Down below, in the leaf litter and burrows, another lineage quietly persisted. The mammal-like synapsids, descendants of the old Permian survivors, had grown smaller and faster. They were nocturnal now, venturing out only when the sun dipped low. Their fur, a new invention, kept them warm in the cool desert nights. Their teeth were precise and efficient, allowing them to chew instead of simply bite. They lived on insects and roots, on scraps of food the great reptiles ignored. To the mighty predators of the Triassic, they were insignificant. But in their smallness lay power. In their patience, destiny. The great rivers of Pangea. Across the continent, rivers shaped the path of life. They were long and wide, flowing across half the planet before finding the sea. Each river system was its own world. A network of wetlands, sandbars, and deltas teeming with life. Amphibians still lingered here. Remnants of the ancient world. Their calls echoing through the dusk. Crocodile-like archosaurs basked in the shallows. And along the banks, the first herds of herbivorous dinosaurs gathered to drink. They were small, cautious, but already moving in groups. A behavior that would one day define the great herds of the Jurassic. As they drank, clouds reflected in the water rippled with their movement. The same clouds drifted toward distant mountains, carrying the breath of the sea inland, feeding forests that grew thousands of kilometers away. Even divided by time, the world was still one living system. The music of a young earth. Everywhere on Triassic Pangea, sound had returned. The buzzing of insects, the croak of amphibians, The deep rumble of thunder rolling across open plains. At night, the forests glowed faintly with bioluminescent fungi. A reminder that even decay was part of the living cycle. Fireflies danced among ferns. Their light a quiet echo of the stars above. For the first time since the Great Dying, the world felt alive enough to sing again. It was a fragile harmony, but it was music nonetheless. The song of recovery. Of life remembering its purpose. The slow separation. But deep beneath Pangea's calm surface, motion continued. The same tectonic restlessness that had once forged the supercontinent was now working in reverse. Cracks began to form. Rifts opened across the land. Magma seeped upward in faint, glowing lines that stretched for thousands of kilometers. At first, these were small movements, imperceptible in a lifetime. But over millions of years, they would pull the world apart again. The first hints of the Atlantic Ocean were forming. A whisper of the future beneath the ancient ground. The balance of hope. For now, though, Pangea still stood united. Its forests breathed together. Its rivers linked the poles. Its skies carried the same winds across every horizon. It was a single, vast world alive with possibility. If you had stood anywhere on that land and listened, you would have heard the quiet pulse of hope in every direction. In the rustle of conifer needles. In the calls of young reptiles testing their wings. In the steady drip of rain that fed the soil. This was the world learning to trust itself again. The scars of extinction were fading into memory. And the earth had entered a new rhythm. Steady, creative, and full of potential. The next age was waiting. And from these humble beginnings, the most famous creatures in the history of the planet were about to step forward. And take the stage. The earth had learned how to live again. From the dust of its own near death, it had rebuilt forests, oceans, and skies. Now, the planet began to dream in larger shapes once more. Small creatures that once hid in burrows began to grow tall, bold, and swift. Across the plains of Pangea, footsteps deepened, and shadows lengthened. The Triassic was becoming an age of motion, of invention, of return to greatness. The growing world. For tens of millions of years after the Great Dying, the world had been modest. Its animals were small, its ecosystems fragile. But stability has a way of feeding ambition. Rains came predictably again. Rivers widened, carving valleys where life could flourish. Forests reached for the sky. Their roots binding soil that had once been only dust. The air filled once more with oxygen. And the planet's breath deepened. Evolution responded. Where small creatures had darted through undergrowth, larger ones began to follow. Legs grew longer. Lungs more efficient. Heart stronger. The world was ready to hold giants again. And evolution was eager to oblige. The first true dinosaurs. In the heart of Pangea. In lands that would one day become South America and Africa. A new kind of creature appeared. They were small at first. Graceful, two-legged hunters no longer than a person's height. Their bones were light but strong. Their tails balanced their stride as they sprinted through the ferns. They hunted in daylight. Their eyes keen and forward-facing. They were the first true dinosaurs. Names we would one day give them, Eoraptor, Herosaurus, Coelophysis, mean nothing to their own time. They were simply the next step in a long experiment of motion and muscle. Their bodies were tuned to endurance. Their lungs worked like bellows. pulling oxygen efficiently through a system of air sacs that lightened their weight. Their bones were hollow. Their movements graceful. For the first time in Earth's history, speed had evolved into elegance. The rivalry of reptiles. But they were not alone. Other reptiles still shared the stage. Crocodile-like hunters, armored herbivores, and towering predators that had dominated since the early Triassic. Among them were the Rauisuchians. Beasts that could weigh a ton and stand taller than any human. Their skulls were massive. Their jaws lined with blades of bone. When they struck, the ground itself seemed to tremble. For millions of years, dinosaurs lived in their shadow. Smaller, quicker, but less powerful. Yet the balance was already shifting. The climate was changing, favoring speed and stamina over brute strength. As seasons grew longer and droughts more severe, the heavy rulers of the old world began to fade. The lighter, more adaptable dinosaurs endured. It was not conquest by battle, but by patience. The future belonged to those who could keep moving. The Green Kingdom expands. Pangea's forests were vast once more. Along the equator, conifers reached high into the humid sky, their trunks rising straight as columns from the mist. Between them, cycads and ginkgos spread broad leaves that shimmered in the sun. Under their shade, ferns formed a thick, springy carpet. The air was warm, rich with the scent of sap and soil. These forests were the lungs of the Triassic world. They exhaled oxygen into the sky, and anchored rivers that wound like silver threads through the green. At their edges grazed the first herds of herbivorous dinosaurs. Beaked, bipedal, and cautious, they fed on soft ferns and low leaves, their small teeth clipping vegetation with gentle precision. They moved in groups, their heads twitching in rhythm, alert to danger. Wherever prey gathered, predators followed. The light fell through the trees in shifting gold, and between those shadows moved the hunters. Slender, silent, and swift. The Triassic world had become a stage for endless pursuit. The deserts of the interior. But not all of Pangea was lush. Far inland, away from the moisture of the coasts, the heart of the supercontinent remained dry. Vast deserts stretched across its middle latitudes, their dunes rising and falling like frozen waves. Here, life took on other forms. Creatures armored against heat and thirst. Plants that could store water in thick leaves and trunks. Fossil footprints from these regions tell of small herds crossing dunes at dawn, their shadows stretching across endless red sand. The air shimmered with heat by noon. Evening brought cold and silence. This harsh interior was both challenge and sanctuary. Only the most adaptable survived here. And those survivors would one day give rise to the toughest creatures the Earth had ever seen. The first giants. Among the early dinosaurs were a few lineages that dared to grow larger. At first, just a little, longer limbs, thicker ribs. A neck that could reach higher leaves. But as food grew abundant and predators thinned, their size became their strength. The first sauropodomorphs, ancestors of the colossal long-necked dinosaurs, appeared during this time. They were still small by later standards, no heavier than a horse. But their bodies hinted at what would come. Long tails for balance, columnar legs built for weight, and deep chests for vast lungs. They moved slowly, their every step deliberate. But they could graze over wide territories and outlast smaller creatures in lean times. As generations passed, They grew larger, feeding higher in the trees, their shadows stretching longer with each century. In them, the blueprint of the Jurassic giants was already written. Oceans of change. While land reawakened to giants, the oceans were not idle. The ichthyosaurs had become sleek and swift, the undisputed masters of the open sea. They gave birth to live young, nursed them in the shallows, and hunted with intelligence and coordination. Their eyes were so large they could see in the dark depths where sunlight could not reach. They were among the first animals to sense pressure and vibration as whales do today. But they were not alone. Another group, the Nothosaurs, swam closer to shore, their long necks weaving through the shallows like snakes. They preyed on fish and squid, their sharp teeth flashing under the waves. Some would eventually evolve into the mighty plesiosaurs of later ages, creatures that turned grace into power. The seas of the Triassic had reclaimed their majesty. Life filled every depth again. Skies of motion. Above it all, the pterosaurs flourished. Their wings, stretched over long fingers, carried them across the warm currents that rose from the land. They nested in cliffs, their cries echoing over the forests. Some were hunters, diving for fish. Others were scavengers, gliding over herds to pick clean what the ground left behind. Their bones were delicate, but they were everywhere. A reminder that life no longer belonged to the ground alone. In their silhouettes, the planet had found freedom. A planet in transition. The Triassic was an age of experimentation. The Earth trying on new shapes, testing what life could be. Every environment was a laboratory. Every species a hypothesis written in bone and breath. But while life thrived on the surface, the planet beneath was restless. The crust of Pangea groaned under its own heat. New cracks appeared in its foundations. Rifts filled with lava. Mountains rose where plains had been. In time, these fissures would grow into seas, splitting the supercontinent apart. The unity of the Earth was ending again. Slowly, silently, the map of the world began to change. The march of time. By the late Triassic, the world was alive with promise. Dinosaurs were spreading, learning new ways to eat, to hunt, to move. The air was thick with insects. Forests echoed with calls and footsteps. The oceans shimmered with silver schools of fish and sleek predators. But beneath this thriving world, the clock of catastrophe was ticking. For all its growth, the Triassic would end as all ages do. In fire and change. Another extinction waited at the horizon. Smaller than the one that had come before, but powerful enough to close one chapter and open the next. For now, though, the Earth stood in balance. Pangea stretched unbroken from pole to pole, its coasts kissed by calm seas, its skies bright and blue. From deserts to forests, from rivers to volcanoes, every corner of the planet hummed with energy. The great dying was long past, and the age of the dinosaurs had begun its steady climb. The world had healed, and in its healing, it had become magnificent once more. The promise of giants. If you could walk across Pangea in that moment, from the humid equator to the frozen poles, you would see the story of life unfolding with perfect rhythm. Tiny mammals hiding by night, reptiles basking on stone, herbivores grazing under tall trees, predators watching from the shadows. Above them, wings tracing arcs of sunlight in the air. The Earth had not just survived, it had evolved into something new. Every breath of wind, every ripple of water, carried the same message. That creation never ends. That every ending gives rise to another beginning. This was not yet the golden age of dinosaurs. But it was the rehearsal. The actors had taken their places. The stage was set. And the curtain was ready to rise. On the greatest performance in Earth's history. The world had changed its rhythm again. The restless crust of Pangea groaned, and the cracks that once whispered beneath the soil now began to sing. From those fractures, the future emerged. The age of the Triassic was ending. And with it the first act of the dinosaur story. Now, the curtain lifted on a new world, wetter, greener, louder. The beginning of the Jurassic period. When life rediscovered abundance on a scale it had never known before. The breaking of Pangea. Deep beneath the continents, heat gathered like breath in a furnace. The single landmass of Pangea, stretched almost halfway around the globe, could no longer hold itself together. Along the seams of the supercontinent, lava welled upward in slow crimson tides. Mountains heaved. Faults opened. Rifts filled with glowing rivers of magma that cooled into black stone. In time, those rifts would drown in seawater. And the first outlines of the Atlantic Ocean would appear. For the creatures that roamed above, these changes were not sudden. A valley deepened here. A coastline flooded there. But over millions of years, the single world of the Triassic fractured into many. Continents began to drift apart. Each carrying its own climates, forests, and fates. Separation brought diversity. Isolation became the mother of invention. And evolution, ever restless, seized the opportunity. The climate of renewal. As Pangea broke apart, the Earth's climate softened. The vast interior deserts shrank as new oceans carried moisture inland. Rain fell where it had not fallen for ages. Green returned in endless variety. Seasonal winds spread pollen across wide plains. The air shimmered with life, the heavy perfume of conifers. The whisper of cycads opening after morning rain. Swamps spread along the coasts. Their reeds standing tall in water so clear it reflected the sky. The planet had entered its great greenhouse phase. There were no ice caps at the poles. Only temperate forests stretching almost to the ends of the world. Everywhere, warmth meant growth. And growth meant motion. The reign of the sauropods. From that abundance rose the giants. The descendants of the modest sauropodomorphs of the Triassic. Now towered above the trees. They were the sauropods. Living mountains of bone and breath. Their necks could reach 10 meters high. Their tails swept the earth like slow pendulums. Each step they took carried the weight of a dozen elephants. Yet they moved with quiet grace. Their hearts were enormous engines, pumping blood through necks longer than many city buses. Their lungs filled and emptied in rhythms deep as tides. They fed almost without pause, stripping branches with spoon-shaped teeth, digesting entire forests over the course of their lives. They traveled in herds that stretched across the horizon. A migration of thunder. Where they passed, the ground shook. The air vibrated. And even the wind seemed to bow before their size. For the first time since the planet's birth, Earth had built creatures that could challenge its own scale. The lords of the land. Yet not all the power belonged to herbivores. The Jurassic world also gave rise to hunters. Lean, intelligent, and terrifyingly efficient. Among them strode the theropods. Two-legged predators descended from the swift hunters of the Triassic. Their bodies were built for pursuit. Strong thighs, long tails, and eyes that locked onto movement. Each claw and tooth was a tool. Each muscle a wire drawn tight by hunger. Some grew vast. Creatures like Allosaurus. Apex hunters whose shadows stretched across the plains. Others remained small and clever. Hunting in packs. Communicating with chirps and gestures. In them lay the seeds of future lineage. The ancestors of birds. Already whispering of flight. At dawn, when the mist still hung low in the valleys. These predators moved like living smoke. Their calls echoed through the forests. Answered by the nervous shuffling of herds miles away. The balance of power was set. The strong to hunt. The vast to endure. The sky takes wing. While giants ruled the land. The skies filled with motion. Pterosaurs had survived the Triassic and now blossomed into every shape the air could allow. Some, no bigger than sparrows, hunted insects above riverbanks. Others, the great rhamphorhynchoids, soared on wings wider than a man's outstretched arms. Their beaks tipped with teeth for catching fish mid-flight. Their wings caught sunlight like sails of silk. At dusk, entire flocks glided across orange skies. Their shadows rippling over the sea below. They nested in cliffs. Their cries echoing across the waves like the laughter of ghosts. The earth had learned to fill even its emptiest spaces with life. Oceans of wonder. Beneath those skies. The seas of the Jurassic shimmered with life and color. Reefs flourished along the newborn coasts. Fish glittered in endless schools. Turning the water into liquid mirrors. In the open ocean swam the descendants of the Nothosaurs. The Plesiosaurs. Their long necks curved like serpents through the waves. Their flippers slicing silently through the blue. Some hunted near the surface. Others dove deep in pursuit of squid. Sharing those waters were the sleek ichthyosaurs. Now faster and more specialized than ever. They chased prey with dolphin-like grace. Their tails beating in powerful arcs. Some species gave birth in the shallows. Their newborns swimming beside them within minutes. A tender scene repeated across millions of years. The ocean was not merely recovered. It was exuberant. A living canvas painted in movement and light. The song of forests. On land, forests stretched farther than any I could see. Conifers formed the backbone of this world. Their needles whispering in every breeze. Beneath them grew cycads with armored trunks. Ferns as high as a person. And horsetails thicker than a wrist. The air was heavy with pollen and humidity. Dragonflies skimmed over ponds. Beetles burrowed in the rich soil. Even decay was alive. Fungi threading through fallen trunks. Returning nutrients to the roots of the living. Amid this abundance, smaller creatures thrived unseen. Frogs, turtles, lizards, and the first true mammals. Warm-blooded shadows of fur that scurried by night. They were quick, cautious, clever. Waiting their time. The gentle nights. The nights of the Jurassic were long and luminous. Without city or flame. The stars burned clear from horizon to horizon. The Milky Way arced across the sky like frost. The air was thick with scent, resin, rain, and the musk of giants. You could have stood on a hillside and heard the world breathing. The low rumble of sauropods moving through trees. The far cry of a predator. The splash of waves against new shores. It was a living symphony. The pulse of a planet in perfect equilibrium. The drift of continents. Slowly, invisibly. The continents continued to move. The rift between what would become Africa and North America widened. Flooded by seawater. To the south, Gondwana, the supercontinent of the southern hemisphere, began to tilt and crack, sending fragments toward what would become India, Antarctica, and Australia. Each separation changed the world's winds and rains. Where there had been deserts, now forests grew. Where there had been inland seas, now mountains rose. The earth was forever sculpting itself anew. From space, had there been eyes to see it, the planet would have looked alive. Its plates drifting like slow clouds. Its oceans breathing around them. The balance of power. The Jurassic was an age without haste. Change moved slowly. And life grew vast because it could. Predators ruled with precision. Herbivores with patience. Forests recycled the breath of the giants. And the giants fed the soil with their passing. It was a circle so perfect that nothing seemed likely ever to disturb it. But balance, on Earth, is always temporary. The planet's crust was still restless. Volcanoes flared along the edges of drifting continents. Earthquakes shook new coastlines. And in those tremors, the seeds of the next transformation were already stirring. The promise of flight and fur. In hidden corners of this warm world, two quiet revolutions were taking shape. One lived in the air. The small, feathered descendants of theropods. Their feathers, at first for warmth or display, had become instruments of flight. Each leap brought them closer to mastery of the sky. Soon, they would no longer need to fall. The other lived in the shadows. The early mammals, tiny and persistent. Their senses sharpened in darkness. Their hearts beat fast and warm. They nursed their young. Taught them the secrets of survival. And carried forward a new kind of intelligence. Not of power, but of care. Both would survive the giants. Both would inherit the world in the end. A world in bloom. For now, though, the Jurassic world was a triumph of vitality. From the smallest fern to the greatest sauropod, life pulsed in unison with the turning of the earth. The air was thick with oxygen. Storms carried life from one coast to another. Volcanoes fertilized the soil even as they burned it. Every loss fed a new beginning. The earth had recovered not just from death, but from memory. It had learned how to thrive again. Stand in imagination on one of those coasts. Waves rolling in from a young Atlantic. Pterosaurs circling above. Herds of sauropods grazing on the horizon. The sky glows amber with late sun. The air hums with life. This is the planet at peace with itself. The heartbeat of creation slowed to a perfect rhythm. But even peace, in deep time, is only an interlude. The next movement is already composing itself beneath the surface. The world has found its stride. The continents drift apart in slow confidence. The air hums with warmth. And life, in all its forms, has filled every corner of the earth. The age of the Jurassic giants has arrived. What began as scattered survivors in the Triassic has now become an empire of breath and bone. Stretching from pole to pole. Everywhere, motion. Everywhere, song. Everywhere, life that touches the edge of the impossible. The golden earth. It is a world without ice. The poles are green, wrapped in fern and pine. The equator glows beneath a sun that never seems to fade. Seas lie warm and shallow over half the planet. Their color a shifting dance of turquoise and gold. Volcanoes mark the boundaries of drifting continents. But even their fire now feeds the cycle of growth. Ash falls like fertilizer. Rivers carry minerals to the sea. And the earth, for the first time in its history, breathes in harmony with itself. This is the late Jurassic. Some 155 million years before our time. And it is a masterpiece of living balance. The reign of the Titans. Across the floodplains of what will one day become South America and Africa, colossal creatures move through the haze of morning. They are the sauropods. The largest animals ever to walk the land. Their necks reach high above the canopy, stripping branches that no other creature can touch. Their hearts pump oceans of blood through bodies the size of houses. Their tails sway in slow counterpoint. The rhythm of the earth made visible. Brachiosaurus stands among them. A living tower whose head grazes the clouds. Nearby, Diplodocus glides through the forest like a river of muscle. Its whip-like tail cutting through air thick with pollen. The ground trembles under their weight. But the world has grown strong enough to hold them. Where they feed, forests reshape themselves. New trees evolve to grow faster. To reach higher. To survive the endless hunger of the giants. Even extinction cannot compete with creation's appetite. The web of the Green Kingdom. The forests of the late Jurassic are living cathedrals. Light filters through the high canopies, splitting into beams that shimmer with dust and spores. Cycads, ferns, and conifers knit together a world both ancient and eternal. Their trunks rise in straight columns. Their roots locked in the soil like the pillars of time. Beneath this green roof, smaller dramas unfold. Tiny mammals scurry through undergrowth, feeding on insects and seeds. Lizards bask on fallen logs, their scales glittering like polished stone. Insects fill the air with a steady hum. The oldest music the planet knows. Every leaf, every grain of soil, is part of the great conversation. Growth, decay, rebirth. The endless whisper of life teaching itself how to continue. The lords of the hunt. But no paradise is without its predators. Through the forests of North America and Africa, the ground quivers with heavier steps. The air smells of iron and musk. A shadow moves between the trees. The hunter of the Jurassic world, Allosaurus. It is not the largest predator the Earth will ever know. But it is one of the most efficient. Its jaws are deep and serrated. Its claws curved and strong. It hunts not by blind charge but by precision. It waits. It listens. It watches. When the moment comes, it strikes with terrifying grace. Its teeth slicing through flesh like the blades of a living saw. Even the mighty sauropods must beware when an Allosaurus pack is near. For the first time, coordination enters the art of the hunt. Groups working together. Testing the balance of power between speed and intelligence. In the eyes of these predators, one can glimpse the future of cunning itself. The skies of fire and feather. Above the plains, the air is thick with wings. Pterosaurs, masters of flight, now fill every sky. They roost along cliffs, their silhouettes flickering against the sun. Some are small, flitting between branches like birds. Others, Pterodostro, Sungaripterus, Rhamphorhynchus, span 5 meters from wingtip to wingtip. They feed on fish, on insects, on the wind itself. At dusk, they rise in vast flocks, turning the horizon into a living storm. But not all wings belong to reptiles now. Among the trees, another revolution is taking flight. Tiny, feathered creatures leap from branch to branch. Their feathers not just for warmth or show, but for gliding, for testing the air's patience. Archaeopteryx, a creature balanced between dinosaur and bird, spreads its feathered limbs and beats once, twice. It glides from tree to tree, the wind catching in its primitive wings. The first true flight of feathered life has begun. Oceans of light. Beneath the continent's drifting edges, the oceans glow with abundance. Warm currents weave between the coasts, carrying nutrients from volcanoes and rivers. The seas are full of motion. Plesiosaurs with long necks like serpents. Ichthyosaurs slicing through waves in silver arcs. Fish in clouds so dense they shimmer like liquid mirrors. Reefs expand into sprawling metropolises of coral and sponge. Crabs and ammonites crawl across the sea floor, leaving trails like calligraphy in sand. Every surface is alive. Every shadow a possibility. The oceans are not yet ruled by whales or sharks as we know them. But they are no less magnificent. Each creature, from the smallest plankton to the largest marine reptile, writes another verse in the planet's hymn of motion. The drift of continents. Even in this golden age, the Earth's patience is shifting. The continents continue their slow drift apart. Laurasia, the northern landmass, now stretches from what will become North America to Asia. To the south, Gondwana begins to fragment. New oceans open, their salt air changing wind and rain patterns. Volcanoes ring these coasts in chains of fire, spilling ash that settles as fertile soil. The world becomes patchwork, a mosaic of ecosystems, each evolving in its own direction. Isolation breeds invention. Creatures begin to diverge, their shapes molded by mountains, rivers, and sea. From this fragmentation, the incredible diversity of the Cretaceous will one day bloom. The forests that glow at night. As dusk settles over the Jurassic forests, the air cools and stills. Frogs croak in the ponds. Fireflies drift between tree trunks, their light pulsing in rhythmic codes. Above, pterosaurs glide in silence, their wings outlined against a violet sky. The forests themselves seem to breathe. Leaves exhale moisture, forming mist that glows faintly in the starlight. Fungi bloom in the decaying wood, their filaments glimmering softly. Bioluminescence. The Earth's quiet magic. Under this dim glow, small mammals emerge from burrows. They move cautiously, their fur glistening with dew. They feed, groom, explore. They are small, but their story is immense. They are the promise of the future. Wrapped in shadows. The language of the earth. The Jurassic world speaks in sounds few would recognize. The low bellows of sauropods across valleys. The hiss of insects in the heat. The booming calls of pterosaurs echoing from cliffs. Each sound is part of a great orchestration. The conversation between life and time. The earth listens. It records everything. Every footprint pressed into mud. Every ripple fossilized in stone. Each whisper of wind. Each cry in the dark. will one day be written in rock. Millions of years from now, those stones will speak again. They will tell of giants, of forests, of wings that learn to master the air. They will tell of balance. Brief, breathtaking balance. Before change comes once more. The calm before the shift. For all its harmony, this age too carries its tension. The Earth's core is restless. New rifts open along the coasts of Africa and South America. Volcanic gases creep into the sky. Subtle at first. A hint of what will come. The climate begins to shift again. Rains falter. Storms grow fierce. Seasons lengthen and merge. Life, as always, must adjust. But the giants are unbothered. They still roam the forests and plains. Their sheer presence a monument to endurance. They have survived drought, fire, and flood before. And for now, they will continue. The living architecture of a planet at its peak. The majesty of balance. Stand in imagination on one of those golden plains. The horizon blurs in heat. The air smells of pine resin and salt. A herd of Diplodocus moves slowly through the haze. Their silhouettes immense and patient. Above them, pterosaurs drift in spirals. Their wings tracing arcs against the sun. In the distance, thunder rolls. Or perhaps it is simply the sound of 1,000 feet. This is not just an era. It is a heartbeat in stone. A memory written in air. The Jurassic is Earth's great exhalation. A breath of peace before the long storm to come. And though the giants do not know it, their time will pass. New creatures wait in the wings. New climates, new continents. New destinies. But for this moment, in this golden light, the Earth is perfect. Alive. Boundless. Content. The world is no longer one. The supercontinent of Pangea has become a memory. Broken into many lands drifting across a blue and restless sea. Where once there was unity, now there is movement. Continents sailing like great ships through time. It is the Cretaceous period. 100 million years before the age of humankind. And the Earth has become an orchestra of color and sound. The shape of a new world. By now, the continents have taken on familiar outlines. The early Atlantic stretches wide between Africa and the Americas. India drifts northward. A lonely island on a collision course with Asia. Australia edges away from Antarctica. Its coasts shimmering with new coral reefs. The world looks almost as we know it. But the creatures that walk it belong to a dream older than memory. Volcanoes trace fiery borders along the drifting plates. Their smoke rises into high, thin clouds that paint the sunsets crimson. Rainforests spread across the equatorial belts. While temperate forests thrive near the poles. Even in the coldest latitudes. The world is warm and alive. Ice has vanished entirely. The planet hums with the heat of creation. The gardens of the Cretaceous. The greatest transformation of this new world comes not from giants, but from flowers. Until now, the Earth's green kingdom had been one of ferns, cycads, and conifers. Ancient plants that thrived through patience, not speed. But somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the forest, a quiet revolution begins. A plant blooms. Its petals unfold like light. It offers sweetness to the air. A lure, a promise. And to that promise come insects. Drawn by scent and color. They drink, they brush against pollen. And they carry the gift of life from one bloom to another. This is the dawn of the flowering plants. The angiosperms. They spread with breathtaking speed, painting the continents in every hue. Yellow fields, purple meadows, crimson hillsides. They reshape entire ecosystems, inviting new partnerships between plant and animal. Butterflies and bees evolve to meet them. Fruit follows flower. Seeds travel farther. And for the first time, the planet tastes sweetness. The age of air and color. The skies of the Cretaceous are not silent. Birds, true descendants of the small feathered theropods, have now mastered the air. They fill the forests with sound. Chirps, trills, calls that echo between trees like laughter. Feathers have grown more intricate. Designed not only for flight, but for beauty. The first flashes of color appear in plumage. Iridescent blues, deep scarlets, gold like sunlight on water. They perch among flowering branches, feeding on nectar, fruit, and insects. They build nests from twigs and moss. Their fragile eggs hidden under the green canopy. They are small, but they carry within them the genius of adaptation. When the age of giants ends, these creatures of air will inherit the sky. The return of the oceans. The seas of the Cretaceous are vast and warm. Blue mirrors stretching between continents. They are alive in every direction. Reefs bloom with new species of coral. Fish move in glittering walls that twist like liquid glass. Ammonites drift near the surface, their shells glowing faintly in filtered sunlight. And among them swim the marine reptiles, the sovereigns of the deep. The long-necked plesiosaurs glide gracefully through shallows, while the massive mosasaurs rule the open ocean. True sea dragons. Their jaws lined with rows of teeth built for power. They hunt anything that moves, even each other. Their tails propel them forward in sweeping arcs, their scales glinting in pale gold light. Beneath them, the seafloor blooms with new life. Sponges, crustaceans, and burrowing clams. Every inch of the ocean breathes. Every wave carries the memory of time. The kingdom of dinosaurs. On land, life has reached its most extravagant form. The earth is a stage of titans and wonders. In North America, Apatosaurus still moves through misty valleys, though smaller now than its Jurassic ancestors. In the plains of Asia, sleek predators stalk the shadows. Creatures like Deinonychus and Velociraptor. Feathered, intelligent, precise. They hunt in groups. Their eyes sharp and calculating. They are small compared to the giants, but their minds are fast. They are the thinkers of their time, the prototypes of the avian future. Meanwhile, in every corner of the world, the great plant-eaters dominate the horizon. Iguanodon, with its thumb spike and heavy frame, grazes among conifers. Ankylosaurus moves like a living tank, its body shielded in armor, its tail ending in a crushing club. And in the south, the great titanosaurs, creatures longer than blue whales, wander through forests of fern and flower. Their sheer mass shapes the landscape itself. Yet for all their power, they are not the true rulers. Not yet. The tyrants. The apex of predation arrives in a single name. Tyrannosaurus. In what will one day be North America. Forests thunder with its steps. Its head alone weighs as much as an entire horse. Its jaws capable of crushing bone. It is both elegance and terror. A masterpiece of evolution's precision. But T-Rex is not the only sovereign. Across the world, other giants rise. Giganotosaurus in the southern lands. Mapusaurus, Tarbosaurus, Daspletosaurus. Each adapted to its own continent. Its own prey. Its own destiny. They are not mere hunters. They are the culmination of 150 million years of design. They move with purpose. Breathe with intelligence. And rule through awe. The whispering forests. Even amid such grandeur, life continues in quieter corners. In the underbrush. Small mammals, descendants of the old synapsids, scurry through the shadows. They dig, they climb, they nurse their young. They feed on seeds, eggs, and insects. Their bodies are warm, their fur soft. They live short lives. But every generation carries a refinement. Sharper hearing, quicker reflexes. Smarter instincts. They are overlooked by the giants above. But their story is only beginning. They will outlast them all. The drift continues. The continents now look like the map of a modern world. Though still young and shifting. New oceans breathe between them. Sending warm currents around the globe. This circulation of water and air creates climates of infinite variety. Tropical jungles, coastal marshes, open plains. Polar forests that see half a year of light. Half a year of darkness. And everywhere, life adapts. In the Arctic Circle, herds of dinosaurs migrate with the seasons. Enduring long nights under faint auroras. In the deserts, lizards and insects evolve to withstand blazing heat. In the mountains, streams cut through stone. Carrying minerals that will one day become the bones of time itself. The earth has become a living mosaic. Dynamic, unending, beautiful. The language of fire. Even in this golden age. Fire remains the old teacher. Lightning strikes the forests. Dry seasons turn fields into tinder. Flames race through the meadows. Crackling like the heartbeat of the planet. But fire is not destruction. It is renewal. Ash falls. Fertilizing soil for new growth. Seeds burst open under the heat. Life answers flame with rebirth. As it always has. Every blaze is a whisper from the earth. Nothing is lost. Everything changes. The murmur of the future. Yet beneath the beauty of the Cretaceous, the first tremors of the end begin to stir. Volcanic chains rumble beneath the Indian Ocean. Carbon dioxide seeps once more into the sky. The climate wavers. Still warm, but unstable. Storms grow stronger. The balance begins to tilt. And far across the cosmos, a stone drifts through darkness. A fragment of rock and fate. Its path set millions of years before. It spins silently. Oblivious to the paradise below. The earth, for now, does not know. It continues its slow exhalation. A living, breathing miracle on the edge of change. The symphony of abundance. If you could stand anywhere on this planet now. Beneath the wings of pterosaurs. Beside the feet of titans. Within the shadow of flowering trees. You would feel it. The pulse of perfection. The air thick with scent. The rivers gleaming like veins of silver. The forests shimmering under golden sun. Every sound, every heartbeat. woven into the same eternal rhythm. This is the Cretaceous Earth. A planet at its most alive. The culmination of everything that came before. The crescendo before silence. For soon, the stars will fall. And when they do, the age of dinosaurs will end. But not life. Never life. The Earth will remember. And it will begin again. The Earth had never been so full of life. Forests stretched from pole to pole. The seas glittered with color. The skies were thick with wings. Every continent hummed with the pulse of creation. And yet, deep within that perfection, something was changing. A faint imbalance. A whisper of what was to come. This was the late Cretaceous. 66 million years before humankind. And the planet was about to face the greatest ending since time began. The calm before the fire. For millions of years, the world had been generous. Rain fell in rhythm. Seasons turned in perfect measure. Even the great predators seemed content. In the forests of what will one day be North America, the air is warm and heavy with the scent of pine. Herds of triceratops move through the undergrowth. Their horns glinting in the morning light. They feed together. Their low rumbling calls echoing like music. In the open plains, Tyrannosaurus rex walks alone. Each step is slow, deliberate. Its great head swinging from side to side. It is not merely a killer, but a monarch. A creature so perfectly made for its world that it needs no improvement. Above them, pterosaurs drift in wide circles. The air is thick with insects. Birds sing from the flowering trees. Even the oceans, home to Mosasaurus and Ammonites, are calm and full. The world feels eternal. But eternity, on Earth, is always borrowed time. The whisper in the sky. Far beyond the blue curve of the planet, a small object drifts through darkness. It is no larger than a mountain. It has wandered for millions of years. Silent, invisible. Caught in the slow gravity of the sun. Its path is inevitable. Its aim unthinking. Its destination, the Earth. In a universe of endless chance, one alignment changes everything. And so, on a quiet day in the late Cretaceous, when the air is still and the forests are green, the sky begins to shine with a second sun. The impact. It happens in a moment too brief for thought. The asteroid strikes near what will become Chicxulub, on the Yucatan Peninsula. For an instant, the world explodes. Light brighter than any dawn floods the atmosphere. Mountains of rock vaporize. The sea itself rises in walls of fire. Shockwaves race across the planet. Flattening forests. Igniting plains. Turning stone to liquid and air to flame. A wall of water, taller than cities, rushes outward from the impact, crushing everything in its path. The energy released is greater than that of 1 billion atomic bombs. In the space of minutes, the Cretaceous world is unmade. The rain of fire. From the sky falls ash, glass, and molten stone. Every fragment of rock thrown upward by the impact rains back down, re-entering the atmosphere at thousands of degrees. The air becomes an oven. Forests ignite in every corner of the world. Even the oceans begin to boil near their surfaces. For hours, maybe days, the world burns. Creatures run, fly, dive. But nowhere is safe. The great herds vanish into flame. The skies fill with smoke and ash until the sun disappears. The earth, once bright with color, turns black. The long night. Then comes silence. The fires die. The world cools. The ash settles like snow. A thick, choking darkness covers the planet. The sun cannot pierce it. For months, maybe years. No light reaches the ground. The temperature plunges. Photosynthesis stops. Plants wither. Forests die. The chain of life collapses from the bottom up. Herbivores starve. Predators follow. Even the seas grow still as plankton fade and coral turns gray. The giants fall one by one. Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, Hadrosaurus. Each species, perfect in its time, ends here. A dynasty of 180 million years. Reduced to silence. The ash years. When the darkness finally begins to thin. The world beneath is unrecognizable. Where jungles once stood are fields of ash. Mountains lie scarred and pitted with glass. The air smells of sulfur and death. Only the smallest lives remain. Insects burrow in the soil. Amphibians cling to the edges of cooling ponds. Tiny mammals scurry through the rubble, feeding on seeds and carrion. They had lived in shadows for ages. And now, the shadows belong to them. The world has shrunk. But it still breathes. And that breath, faint, persistent, is enough. The sea that survived. In the oceans. Some life endures. Deep below the lightless surface. Where warmth from the earth's crust seeps into blackness. Microbes thrive around volcanic vents. They feed not on sunlight, but on minerals. Iron, sulfur, methane. Their resilience is ancient. They have survived every catastrophe since life began. And once again, they become the keepers of continuity. From them, the sea rebuilds. Plankton return. Coral grows again. Fish reappear in silver flashes. The oceans remember their rhythm long before the land does. The return of light. Years pass. Then decades. Slowly, sunlight finds its way through the thinning haze. At first, only a faint glow. Then the pale shimmer of dawn. The light touches ash and finds green. Ferns, always the first to return, push through the gray soil. Their spores drift on the wind, covering the desolation with new life. Grass follows. Then flowering plants. Within a few thousand years, the world is green again. The forests regrow faster than anyone might imagine. The rivers clear. The air fills once more with the sound of insects. But the old rulers are gone. The age of reptiles has ended. The throne of the earth stands empty, waiting for the next dream. The heirs of the shadows. From the burrows emerge the survivors. Small, cautious, bright-eyed. They are the mammals. Descendants of the creatures that once hid from dinosaurs by night. They explore the empty forests, finding food where giants cannot. They eat everything, roots, fruit, eggs, insects. They breed quickly, adapt easily, and fill the silence with their tiny hearts. In their warmth, the earth feels its pulse return. In their curiosity, the future begins. The empty skies. The pterosaurs are gone. But the air is not empty. The birds, those winged heirs of the dinosaurs, still soar above the forests. They have survived the darkness, their feathers insulating them against cold, their diets flexible enough to outlast famine. They build nests once more, sing again, and in their song, the voice of the Mesozoic world lingers. Through them, the dinosaurs never truly die. They simply change shape, adapting to the world that rises after fire. The birth of a new world. From the ruins of the Cretaceous rises the dawn of the Paleogene. A planet reborn. Volcanoes still smolder, but the skies are blue again. The continents continue their slow drift, but the air carries new life. Mammals grow bolder, filling the roles left vacant by the fallen giants. Some return to the sea, others take to the trees. A few learn to run, to hunt, to think. Forests evolve new species of flowering plants. Pollinators multiply. The Earth's great experiment continues, as it always will. The memory of giants. Even as the world moves forward, the bones of the past remain, buried beneath stone. The skeletons of dinosaurs rest like relics of gods. Each fossil is a sentence in the Earth's long autobiography. A record of what it has been, what it has lost, and what it still remembers. Every era ends, but nothing is ever truly gone. The carbon in the air, the minerals in the soil, the dust in our bones, all carry traces of those vanished worlds. The Earth remembers. Stand in imagination on that quiet, cooling Earth. The fires are gone. The forests are young. The stars return, sharp and endless. The wind moves across open plains, carrying with it the scent of new grass and old ash. It passes over buried bones, over seas that still shimmer with heat, and whispers the same truth it always has. Everything changes. Everything continues. The age of dinosaurs has ended. But the story of life is far from over. In the stillness after destruction, the Earth exhales and dreams again. The fire has passed. The smoke has cleared. For the first time in 66 million years, the Earth stands silent and alive. The giants are gone, their bones resting beneath new forests. The seas have healed, the skies have brightened, and the air once again hums with life. But this is not the world of the dinosaurs. It is a new beginning, a softer, more intimate age. The world opens its eyes to morning. This is the dawn of the Cenozoic era. The age of mammals. The age of change. The age that will one day become our own. The first mornings. The planet breathes. Green returns in abundance. Ferns cover the valleys. Grasses begin to spread. And forests climb the slopes of young mountains. Tiny creatures emerge from burrows and roots. The mammals who once lived in the shadows. They stretch, blink, and begin again. They are small, but their hunger is vast. Some scurry through leaves. Others climb the new trees. They feed on seeds, fruit, and insects. They nurse their young with patience. Their hearts beat fast, their blood runs warm. They are adaptable, intelligent, curious. They will inherit the earth. And so begins a quiet revolution. Not of size, but of thought. Not of power, but of potential. The rebuilding of continents. The world itself is still in motion. The continents, long adrift, continue their slow dance. India surges northward, colliding with Asia in a titanic embrace. Mountains rise from that impact. The Himalayas, young, jagged, and eternal. Africa begins to tilt, opening great rift valleys that will one day cradle lakes and life. South America and North America move closer, their meeting still millions of years away. Antarctica drifts south and freezes, becoming the first white continent. The Earth is sculpting the world we will know, continent by continent, breath by breath. The reign of mammals. In the forests and plains of the Paleogene world, life surges forward. Mammals grow large. Some become grazers, others hunters. They fill every empty niche left by the dinosaurs, and then invent new ones. Massive indricothers, the largest land mammals ever, roam the plains that will one day be Central Asia. Their necks stretch toward treetops. Their feet press prints the size of shields. In the rivers, hippopotamus-like anthracotheres wallow in the mud. In the forests, early primates leap from branch to branch, eyes wide with curiosity. Wolves and cats begin to emerge. Whales evolve from land mammals, their legs shrinking, their tails broadening into fins. They return to the oceans their ancestors left, singing new songs in the deep. Each species a thread in a tapestry that grows more intricate with every generation. The climate's breath. The planet warms, then cools, then warms again. Ice retreats to the poles, then advances once more. The rhythm of seasons becomes sharper, more defined. Grasses spread across the continents, turning forests into open plains. New animals adapt to run, to chase, to flee, to explore distance. Speed becomes survival. Eyes sharpen. Brains grow. And with that growth comes awareness. For the first time since life began, the Earth begins to think through its children. The shape of familiar life. By the time the Miocene epoch dawns, the world feels familiar. There are elephants with tusks of ivory white, giraffes stretching toward high branches, rhinoceroses grazing in herds. Cats stalk silently through the grass, while canines run in packs beneath wide blue skies. The seas are alive with whales and dolphins, creatures of grace and voice. Their songs echo through the water, carrying messages across entire oceans. Birds fill the air. Falcons, cranes, albatrosses. Each a living echo of their dinosaur ancestors. The Earth has grown quieter in its majesty, but richer in its detail. The forest of thought. Somewhere in the tropical canopy, among branches heavy with fruit and flowers, a family of primates begins to change. They are agile, curious. Their eyes forward-facing. Their hands made for grasping. They learn to use tools. Sticks, stones, shells. They learn to share food. To warn of danger. To comfort one another. Their minds expand like the dawn. Slow, radiant, unstoppable. Through them, the Earth begins to dream in language. It begins to imagine itself. The birth of humanity. Millions of years later, in the heat of the African plains, a new species stands upright for the first time. The sun warms its skin. Its eyes scan the horizon. Its hands, once made for climbing, learn to shape and strike. This is Homo. The thinker. The builder. The child of the earth who can look back and remember. From Africa, they wander. Across deserts, mountains, and ice. They follow rivers. Cross oceans. Light fires against the dark. They paint on cave walls the memories of animals long gone. They carve stone into blades and beauty. They learn to tell stories. Of gods, of stars, of home. Through them, the earth finds its voice again. Through them, the planet begins to speak its own name. The earth through human eyes. The ages turn. Ice comes and goes. Civilizations rise, fall, and rise again. Forests become fields. Mountains become roads. Stone becomes steel. And the whisper of fire becomes the roar of engines. The earth watches. As it always has. It feels our footsteps. Our cities pulsing with light. It hears our songs. Our language. Our endless reaching toward the stars. Through us. The planet sees itself reflected. A mirror made of consciousness. And in that reflection, it learns something new. That awareness, too, is a form of life. The age of reflection. Now, in the quiet turning of modern time, we stand at the edge of another transformation. Our species shapes the earth faster than any before it. We build, we burn, we rebuild again. We change the air, the sea, the rhythm of seasons. But the story is not over. The earth does not end in us. It continues through us. Every breath we take. Every seed we plant. Every act of creation. Is another verse in its endless poem. We are not separate from the planet. We are its memory. Its awareness. Its moment of self-understanding. The earth whispers still. In wind, in wave, in fire, in thought. And if we listen closely, we can hear the voice that began before time. I endure. I evolve. I remember. The eternal pulse. Look at the world around you. The rain on leaves. The call of a bird in morning light. The curve of the moon across the ocean. All of it, every grain of sand, every drop of water, was forged in the fires of that first dawn. Every creature, every heartbeat, is part of the same unbroken line, stretching back to the first spark in the sea. From stone to flame. From lizard to bird. From whisper to word. The earth has always been one thing. Alive. And so it continues. Through storm and silence. Through loss and renewal. It lives. It dreams. It waits. Because the story of the earth is not one of endings. It is one of becoming. The whispers of earth. And now, as we stand beneath the same stars that watched over Pangea, the same moon that saw the first tides, we hear it again. That ancient voice. That gentle promise. It does not speak in words. It moves in the wind. In the tide. In the slow turning of seasons. It says only this. I am still here. And we, the newest children of this old world, listen. And whisper back. So are we.